Rogue Knight by Illuviar. 31. Chapter 14, Part 5. Phase 14, Ryloth, Endgame. =RK=, Part 5, Lesu, Ryloth. I jumped out of the command walker before it ground to a halt behind the crash-landed escort carrier. That gave me a splendid view of the wall surrounding the city. A section of it, just to the right of the retaliation, exploded outwards, showering the chasm, separating us from Lesu with fist-sized chunks of metal. I cracked a small smile. The combat engineers were doing splendid work. Soon enough, there would be a nice hole in the wall, more than big enough for my tanks. However, first my armor needed a bridge in order to reach the city, and I wasn't crazy enough to try capturing the plasma, one leading to the main gates. Unless whoever was in charge of the CIS forces was a babbling fool, that approach would be a death trap. So I had something else planned. I turned my attention to the converted container ship. It was carrying half of the improvised bridging equipment which my fleet had loaded on Coruscant. It was quite simple, really. The basic component were sheets of warship-grade armor on which my engineers had worked while we were in transit to Ryloth. What those things were remade into was a modular bridge which could be deployed fast, provided that you had the necessary heavy equipment to move the segments and a few engineers to anchor the ends of the bridge on the two sides of whatever you wanted to cross, or a powerful force adept who could do the heavy lifting and possibly speed up the process. Give me covering fire if necessary, and make sure that the engineers get their asses here ASAP, I ordered before closing my eyes and concentrating. I lifted the topmost container containing the necessary equipment and floated it to the edge of the chasm. I used the force to rip open its doors and willed the bridge sections to move. They flew out, one after another, and headed to the edge of the cliffs. A squad of walkers, carrying a platoon of combat engineers and their toys, strode past me and started disgorging their cargo. The clones hurried towards the point where I wanted the bridge built and prepared to anchor it to the ground. =RK=. Obi-Wan ducked under a shot from a CIS tank, which struck the side of a building 20 meters behind him. He deflected a burst from the secondary weaponry of the armored vehicle with saber. He sagged with relief when 2 AP missiles ended the threat before its main cannon could speak again. "Send the next 2 platoons over the wall at our left flank," Kenobi shouted to his aide, who had taken cover behind the nearby wreck of a burning air car. "Right away, sir." The Jedi gave the clone a satisfied nod before glancing at his surroundings. They had taken the defenders by surprise. That was the only explanation to the confused and uncoordinated resistance the Republic forces were facing. Which was a very good thing. The CIS had about 60,000 droids within the capital. At least that was the reasonable estimate. Kenobi wouldn't be surprised if they had twice those numbers. Nevertheless, at the moment that didn't particularly matter. The main droid forces were concentrated to cover the main doors leading into the city. Those troops were redeploying to shore up their right flank, but were not even trying any spoiling counterattacks. Apparently their commander was thinking that his other forces were more than enough to handle the GAR bridgehead, or believed it to be a diversion. Kenobi's biggest problem was a CIS armor battalion, whose lead elements were hitting his left flank. The Jedi had only 80 infantry to throw against them, but that should be sufficient at the moment. Even if the droids managed to overrun that flank, it wouldn't be before the walkers were inside the city. He had received reports that the combat engineers had started blowing up the wall and that Vale was aiding another group in constructing the bridge. It remained to be seen whether Tambor could be captured alive or if they would have to clean up the city the hard way. =RK=, cries flew over a deserted street after dealing with another proton cannon when she noticed movement on a nearby roof. She banked in that direction, activating the zoom function on her helmet. A pair of commando droids were setting up shop on a building to her right. One of them was carrying a big-ass rifle, almost as tall as it was. A sniper and his spotter, how cute. She raced their way and sent her last light missile at them. The spotter noticed the incoming ordnance in time and jumped back, getting out of the kill radius of the weapon. The sniper had time to look her way before the missile struck the body of the weapon in the robot's hands. The resulting explosion obscured the Mandalorian woman from the view of the spotter. She appeared from the cloud of smoke and dust like a swooping bird of prey and opened fire. The second commando droid managed to send a single shot her way before she blasted it with her pistols. The droid managed to hit her. However, the blaster bolt merely melted a part of the armor protecting her left shoulder, leaving Kryze unharmed. She flew away, searching for a secure location. Minute later, Bo-Katan landed on a deserted terrace and smashed through the glass door separating it and the nearby room. She darted inside the apartment building and swept the flat for enemies. Once Kryze was sure that she was safe for a few moments, she started reloading her weapons. She had made it about 2 kilometers into the city, passing the outer ring of CIS forces. On her way, Bo had taken out 3 artillery positions and about a company of droids. When she finished reloading everything, she checked her remaining ordnance. It was a good thing that she had started this insane operation with triple her usual munition load. The only downside was that her rocket pack fuel was at 60%, thanks to the heavy load she started with. No matter. What she had left would do. Bo-Katan had to scout the CIS command posts for Tambor and report his location to the GAR forces, and to capture him if practical. She pressed a button on her left arm guard, and a map of Lesu appeared over her hand. "Where are you?" she muttered, while her eyes were scanning the locations of the command posts she knew about. =RK=, Republic Cruiser Requiem, high orbit over Ryloth. "Multiple launches detected," reported one of the clones manning the CIC of the Venator. "We have CIS fighters rising all over the planet." "All units, this is Requiem. Initiate fire plan red." Another clone spoke calmly in the comm unit built in his station. All over Ryloth, CR-90S and Carrax slashed through the upper layers of the atmosphere to send a barrage of laser or ion fire. After a few shots, the Republic lightships retreated back into space, where they were beyond the reach of the CIS proton cannons. Whole squadrons of droid fighters and bombers disappeared in firestorms caused by the near-orbital strikes. Even shots that missed their targets and would be harmless in space hit the ground, creating explosions and shockwaves that obliterated all nearby small craft. After the first pass, 2/3 of the nearly 1,000 droid fighters had been turned in so much rubble. That would be followed by precision ion cannon strikes and 2 squadrons of torrents led by Ahsoka, which would hunt down the remaining enemy bombers. Before the brief air raid was stopped cold, the CIS forces managed to bomb only a single village, which was uncomfortably close to a camouflaged CIS installation and one of the industrial sites in the southern hemisphere. Minutes later, there would be a cruiser over all previously unknown Confederate bases. Blue and green lances would pierce the heavens, obliterate those facilities. =RK=. Holding Camp Hilos, Southern Hemisphere, Ryloth Cody led his command section to the outskirts of the camp once the perimeter was secure. Before him, the leading elements of 3 battalions were storming the enemy positions. The droids defending the camp never stood a chance. It appeared that all their plans were centered upon preventing the locals from escaping and dealing with the occasional harassing attack by the lightly armed resistance forces. When hit by the missile launchers of a single battalion, they simply disintegrated as a coherent fighting force. Instead of the coordinated resistance Cody had expected, his men were confronted by a squad here, half a platoon there, and single tanks often without any infantry support. Those enemy forces were quickly overwhelmed by the concentrated fire of the clones. Within 10 minutes of the first shot, there was not a single intact droid left within the camp. It was the first time in his career that a plan went off without too big of a hitch. There would be precious few times when that would happen again. Nevertheless, it wasn't an entirely one-sided affair. He lost 30 men when one of his leading companies was hit in both flanks by a platoon-strength super battle droid detachment and the only CIS tank with sufficient infantry support. There were also a 40-odd wounded when all was said and done. However, none of that reflected the situation of the locals. Many of the Twi'lek were sick and starving. Too many for his limited number of medics to help them all before it was too late. When the dust settled days later, it would be revealed that more than 15,000 people had perished in that single camp. Only 100 had been wounded or died as a consequence of the clones' attack. RK, Lesu, Ryloth. It took us 15 minutes to have a 70 meters wide bridge over the chasm surrounding the capital. In that time, the combat engineers within the city had managed to demolish 20-meter wide area of the tough wall. For the moment, that should be good enough. Already 10 tanks were through the breach and the rest of my leading armor battalion were moving in. Meanwhile, the droids defending the main approach to the city had decided to move their metal butts, and my right flank was under attack by a regiment of enemy infantry. Their forward elements had ran headfirst into a hastily prepared kill zone, which ran along an avenue leading to the center of the city. While I was finishing moving the bridge segment, I could hear how that attack was handled. "Here they come," declared a nameless clone. "Wait for them," ordered the captain in charge. "We are under fire," stated another of my men. "Loki is hit. We need a medic over here." "The clankers are coming like they are on a criffing parade," someone exclaimed. "Can the chatter? 10 more seconds and blow the charges," ordered the captain. "Wilco, sir." Even from my position, I could hear when the mines were detonated. It sounded like one long explosion, which, thanks to the echo, went on and on. "Watch them burn," one of my men shouted gleefully. "Ready ion grenades. I want their next charge broken before they can cross the street." Soon afterwards, the last pieces of the bridge were secured. To my left, the walkers were already crossing and heading in. When the construction work was over, I headed to my command tank, which was parked nearby. I needed few minutes of rest in order to replenish some of the force energies I expended doing the heavy lifting. It wasn't glamorous, but without dedicated bridging equipment that could be used in this case, I had to improvise. Inside, I found 5 of the clones who were a new addition to my command. Those folks were my staff, and their presence had made a lot of my work as a general somewhat manageable. I looked at the various displays showing the progress of my troops. My men had captured nearly 5 square kilometers. There was heavy fighting on the flanks, but strangely enough, the path forward wasn't heavily contested. It was tempting to send an armor column thundering straight into the center of the city, but that would leave them vulnerable if one of the flanks collapsed. "I want an armor company to reinforce the right flank. Send the rest of the 7th Walker Battalion to encircle the enemy battalion hitting our left flank." 7th Battalion was the vanguard of my columns entering Lesu. RK, Bo-Katan grinned like a cat who had just eaten the canary. She was near the main CIS command and control center within Lesu when she saw a group of droids exiting the building. They were followed by the unmistakable figure of Tambor, who headed towards the APC in the center of a column of separatists' vehicles. There were 4 tanks in both ends, with 10 personnel carriers in between. Cries would bet a lot on 2 things. First, that each of those machines was chock full with droids, and second, they weren't heading towards the fighting. "Overlord Actual, this is Huntress. I have a visual on Black King. He is preparing to leave Point Eagle, requesting instructions." "Over." "Affirmative, Huntress. Wait 1. This is Rogue Knight. Tail him. I'm heading your way with reinforcements." Bo-Katan's smile became a hungry one. She loved stalking her prey. 32. Chapter 14, Part 6. Phase 14, Ryloth Endgame. RK, Part 6. Lesu, Ryloth. I stared at the map of the city. The best route we could take to intercept the convoy passed through that glaring hole in the enemy lines, which appeared to lead straight into the center of Lesu. The whole thing smelled of an obvious trap. However, given the average tactical competence I've seen so far from both the CIS and the GAR, I wouldn't put it past the Seps to be just that incompetent. It wasn't like such a criff up was particularly worse than their usual penchant for marching towards our lines in a nice square formations that doubled as artillery bait. Something I was going to prove the moment I got my hands on some indirect fire arty, or the standard beam type when I could use it against the droids on open ground. Despite that, I couldn't just assume that whoever was in charge of the CIS here was an idiot. That would be a good way to get a lot of my men killed. "This is Overlord Actual. Send in the hover tanks once 7th Armor Battalion enters the city. They are to split in company strength and commence reconnaissance in force," I ordered and turned my head towards one of my staff officers. Pack, you have tactical command. I'm heading in with the recon elements. If we can get Tambor, we can end this mess now. Yes, sir, he answers and started snapping orders to the tank crews. 5 minutes later, I was entering Lesu. I was on top of one of the hover tanks, holding a handle wielded to its hull. Before we reached Ryloth, I had all of those machines modified so they could transport a squad of infantry each. Thanks to the tank's shields, the troopers had a reasonable degree of protection while riding on top. It was a useful stopgap measure that allowed me to quickly transport a strike force of infantry and armor while I waited for the R&D boffins to get a dedicated IFV designed. Using the walkers, which were not only relatively slow with their 60 km/h top speed, but were also my dedicated armor force, wasn't practical for transporting infantry in a lot of cases. Like right now, when those things were not only needed elsewhere, but were too slow for what I needed to get done. 6 companies of hover tanks spread out from the breach in the enemy defenses and headed deeper into the city. I had given orders for my recon units to avoid the area around the main entrance where the majority of CIS forces were located. So most of the tanks headed either towards the free passage at the center of the enemy lines or looped around the bulk of 7th Battalion, which was moving to flank the enemy armor assaulting our left flank. =RK=. Bo-Katan had been tracking the CIS column for nearly 15 minutes. They had bypassed the majority of hangars she knew of and were steadily moving to the part of the city furthest from the GAR attack. Incidentally, that was the area of Lesu where the main spaceport was located, complete with the largest concentration of CIS air assets in the region. Kryze had thought it strange that the Seps hadn't used their air power against the breach in the city defenses until now. Then, suddenly, everything became obvious. Tambor was hoarding his remaining vultures, believing that they would be able to screen his escape from the planet. That was unlikely considering that majority of the Republic fleet in system was parked over the capital. Though, considering what he was responsible for, Tambor would grasp at any chance to get away. She could imagine what would happen to him if Vale turned him over to the locals, and that was something she could see the general doing in order to make an example of the CIS leader. From her position on the top of a tall building, she glanced at her map, then at the city strewn below her. Unless the CIS convoy took a right at the next intersection, they would have to pass through a choke point in order to reach the spaceport. Bo checked the ordnance she carried. She still had the 4 blocks of explosives she had taken on a whim from one of the Republic armories. She smirked at the CIS column, which moved past the next intersection, without even slowing down. Bo-Katan activated her rocket pack and flew towards the spaceport. =RK=. Obi-Wan allowed himself a tiny smile. The flanking attack on the CIS armor assaulting the GAR left flank worked like a charm. That Separatists' battalion was annihilated in full when 7th Armor struck them from the left and rolled up their own flank. As a direct consequence, the Republic forces were now able to spread in that direction, giving them options other than assaulting the teeth of the CIS defenses around the main gate, or going straight into what was now confirmed to be a trap. The recon units scouting the main, supposedly enemy-free, approaches to the center of the city had nearly ran into a particularly nasty ambush. Those tanks were pulling back in an attempt to break contact with what appeared to be a regiment of enemy infantry supporting another CIS armor battalion. Right now, those Confed forces were moving straight at the Republic positions. Kenobi looked around. A 2nd battalion of walkers was already in the city, but that might not be enough to stop the advancing enemy battalion cold. Not with the regiments of droids concentrated at the GAR right flank. Obi-Wan's eyes fell on the combat engineers who had demolished a section of the walls and now were busy preparing defensive positions at the center of the Republic positions. He looked at the tall buildings flanking the main avenue through which the droids would need to pass if they decided to attack head-on, as usual, and smiled. That smile was out of place on a Jedi's face. =RK=. Wat Tambor was staring glumly at the brown interior of one of the rare APC carriers the CIS possessed. Those machines were exclusively reserved for moving the Confederation leadership when air transport was not available for one reason or another. He had considered taking an air car to the spaceport, but quickly disregarded that idea. It would have been a foolish thing to do with that criffing traitor cries wreaking havoc throughout the city. No matter, the convoy should be more than enough to protect him from a single Mandalorian cutthroat. His bigger problem was getting off-world. Tambor had no illusions about what would happen to him if he was taken alive. When he planned this enterprise, it all looked so simple. The Republic was losing the war, and it was only a matter of time before its military collapsed under the onslaught of countless droids. However, all that was before that new Republic general captured or killed two of the highest-ranking Confederation leaders, placing the quick resolution of the war into question. So he decided to hedge his bets and give the CIS military a boost. Until his brilliant diplomatic coup, the Hutts were either neutral or somewhat supportive to the Republic cause. But he had ended all that nonsense. Now the overgrown worms were on their side, and all it took was capturing a bunch of Twi'lek. No one really cared about. It wasn't like those people were important. Tambor's indignant musings were rudely interrupted. Twin explosions shook the CIS column, making the column ground to a halt. The pair of tanks leading the Confed forces were obliterated a split second before the trailing two met the same fiery fate. To put the situation into perspective, the droids escorting Tambor had taken the shortest route to the spaceport, disregarding everything else. That led them straight through a narrow street, which was now blocked by the burning remains of the armored vehicles. To add insult to injury, Bo-Katan flew over the street on which the convoy was now stranded, sending half of her remaining missiles at the APCs near the one carrying Tambor. Those weapons hit the thinner upper armor of the vehicles, wrecking the top-mounted weaponry and in one case breaching the troop compartment. Inside, the B-2 droids were bathed by the condensed overpressure which scalded the inside of the armored vehicle. Moment later, only 2 of the 10 super battle droids were still combat effective. $RK $. This is insane, Waxer screamed. I had to agree, despite this being my damned-to-hell plan, which in fact seemed to work, at least partially. The remaining recon forces were not only pinpointing CIS positions, but were also drawing the attention of the enemy forces. That allowed us to slip through the positions which the droids were fortifying in an attempt to stave off the inevitable GAR assault into this sector of the city. It looked like that after the destruction of that CIS armor battalion, there weren't any separatists' forces on our left flank that were big enough to try anything larger than a spoiling counterattack. The main enemy forces appeared to be concentrated at the main gate and near the center, which left us a large corridor where we could spread out and fortify. As long as my men were able to hold the breach in the city wall, that is. That at least looked good. By now, there was more than an armor battalion reinforcing the regiment, holding my forces' right flank. Even better, moments ago, Obi-Wan gave me a gleeful report. He used the combat engineers to rig 6 buildings, which he blew up in such a way that they buried a battalion of enemy infantry, as well as at least 2 tank companies. That had left the leading elements of a regimental strength counterattack by the separatists facing my hastily dug-in forces unsupported. Those droids were slaughtered in short order. All that was well and good, but didn't particularly help my situation. I was gripping a handhold for a dear life, while the tank carrying me was racing through the largely deserted streets at more than 100 kilometers per hour. The operative word here was largely. There were various groups of droids which were converging towards the breach. They loved sending pot shots our way as we practically flew through their ranks. Thanks to the shields, that was usually not a real threat. Yet there were exceptions. On 2 occasions we met B-1S carrying missile launchers. While the single hits they managed were harmlessly absorbed by the shields of my tanks, the sheer force of the impacts and resulting explosions shook the hit tanks. Some of my men were unable to hold on and were thrown off the hovercraft. Needless to say, at this speeds none of them survived hitting the ground. That wasn't the worst. We passed through an intersection towards which a column of enemy armor was advancing. Half of my tanks roared past the enemy unscratched before the droids in charge got their shit together and opened fire. Accurate fire. The trailing 2 tanks were struck multiple times. They, as well as the men they carried, were turned into so much confetti. At least that was the last true obstacle we met before breaking into the enemy rear. After the close encounter with the enemy armor, we faced only one more enemy unit. A platoon of B-1 and B-2 droids marching straight in the middle of the street, my tanks passed through. Veers, who was in charge of the hover tank company, merely slowed down a bit so we wouldn't be thrown off and rammed them through. It wasn't as effective as it would have been if we had threaded vehicles, but it was good enough. $RK, I laid eyes on Bo-Katan's handiwork and smiled coldly. She had stopped the convoy carrying Tambor cold. I could clearly see the pair of burning CIS tanks which were part of its rearguard. She was still tracking Tambor and attacking his escort. He was trying to reach the spaceport, which was 2 kilometers from here, but was moving slower than a crippled bantha thanks to her constant harassment. I had my men dismount and sent the light tanks towards the spaceport. I intended to run down my target long before he could reach his destination, but I wanted my light armor to cut him off just in case. We made a short work of the enemy armored column, which stood no chance, stranded as it was. All it took was some thermal detonators, which were thrown by my men, and I guided towards the enemy armored vehicles. The powerful explosive devices wrecked the enemy column, and we headed towards our target. The reason I wasted a bit of time to destroy those Confed vehicles was simple. I didn't want that force at my back, despite them being prevented from moving for the time being. I found Tambor hidden behind the column in front of an ancient-looking building. He was surrounded by 70-odd droids who were shooting in the air in an attempt to take down Bo-Katan. She was strafing them using her blaster pistols. It was obvious that she couldn't get close enough to use her guns effectively without getting shot down. But it was apparent that the CIS leader didn't know that, so he was hunched down behind his cover. Splendid. It was time to end this battle. $RK, Tambor cringed when he saw the distinctive forms of Republic soldiers appearing from a side alley to his left. The enemy troopers wasted no time. Approximately half of them opened fire while the rest ran for cover. All but the man who was obviously leading them did that. "Oh, criff it all, Sushishnha," whispered the leader of the Techno-Union. That man simply strode in the blaster fire of his droids. He had a red lightsaber in his right hand and used it to swat aside the shots aimed at him. Then that man, who could only be General Vale, the accursed leader of the Republic forces which had destroyed Tambor's plans, raised his free hand. Tambor's eyes would have fallen out of their sockets if they hadn't been replaced by cybernetic implants. A stream of purple lightning erupted from the man's palm and struck down nearly half of the droids. More of the machines were cut down by blaster fire, a few of them by their own shots reflected back at them. Another lightning attack all but destroyed the remaining droids, with the survivors lasting a handful of seconds longer. Tambor shook with fear. He could feel unnatural dread gripping his heart with icy fingers. The politician tried to steel himself. He still had few valuable bargain chips. "What, Tambor?" whispered the general's voice, which was distorted by the helmet he wore into an unnerving hiss. "General Vale, perhaps we can reach a compromise," he asked, trying to remove the telltale trembling from his voice. "I have a better idea," said the general. "You will deactivate all the droids on Ryloth, and I won't give you to the locals. They seem to be a bit peeved with you. I wonder why." Despite the way his voice was distorted by the helmet, Tambor could hear the sarcasm dripping from Vale's words. "That isn't enough. I want passage out of this system or you won't get the codes," he said with a determination he didn't feel. Vale simply shook his head and muttered, "They always choose the hard way. Well, it's better that way." The man strode towards him, and Tambor moved backwards on instinct. Something deep inside him screamed that he should have accepted the general's terms. Suddenly, Tambor found himself paralyzed. He felt something touching his mind. Then the world exploded in a wave of crimson agony which engulfed his consciousness. $RK. Kenobi was on the right flank, helping the clones stave off the main CIS counterattack when the droids froze in mid-motion before shutting down. His shoulders sagged in relief. Vale had done it. The CIS on Ryloth was finished. Nevertheless, the Jedi decided not to take any chances. "I want the city swept for any enemy stragglers, and make sure that those clankers stay down for good. I don't want someone reactivating them and catching us off guard," he ordered. The latter was a very real possibility. After all, the droids were simply shut down, not destroyed. Something which will be taken care of soon. RK, General Syndulla, who had been leading his fighters and 2 companies of clones through the city sewers towards the complex containing the shield generators protecting the city, allowed himself a small smile. What was left of his people were now free. If the Republic kept its word, yet it was too late for millions, perhaps more. He looked up to the ceiling and the stars beyond it, ignoring the cheering of his fighters. Despite this victory, he had a sense of foreboding. After the atrocities that the damned separatists committed here on Ryloth, as well as on Naboo and Coruscant, the war was far from over. He could almost feel it. RK, Bo-Katan landed near Vale and looked at him. He had Tambor pressed against the wall and had his right hand pressed to the CIS leader's forehead. They stayed that way for about 5 minutes, despite her few attempts to get answers from the infuriating man. The clones, on the other hand, had acted as that had been business as usual and simply took up defensive positions around them. When Vale was finally finished, he released Tambor. The leader of the Techno-Union activated his comm and started typing a long code before speaking with an empty voice. "It is done. The droids are deactivated. This is the data you require." He continued to type for a minute before retrieving a data chip and handling it to the general. "Splendid," answered Vale. He turned towards his men and ordered, "Take him into custody. I want him on a shuttle to the Requiem ASAP and move him straight to the medbay, where he should be treated for possible brain damage." Then Del-Qatar activated his wrist-mounted computer, plugged in the chip and started working, ignoring everyone else. "Is that it?" she snapped at him. That man had the gall to ignore her. "Yeah, the majority of enemy forces are inactive. There are probably a few commando droids which will be pain in the ass until my men and the locals hunt them down, but there isn't much I can do about that anyway. Now, if you excuse me, I am a bit busy." Bo-Katan gave him a dirty look. "With what? You just said that the enemy has been dealt with. Denying the enemy some liquid assets. That usually meant money. Despite not being a mercenary, Bo was very interested in what Del-Qatar was doing. RK, Chancellor's Office, undisclosed location, Coruscant. Palpatine's right eye twitched. Days. 3 criffing days, and Vale had Ryloth more or less secured. Enough, at least, that he could move most of his forces away from that world soon, and the general himself would be returning to Coruscant in a week or so. It was a good thing that he had a lot of plans going on at the same time. At least the whole debacle on Ryloth wasn't a total loss. Now he had a reasonable idea of how dangerous Vale was, as both a ground and a space commander. Now that he knew, Sidious could plan better for the future. Besides, there were other bright spots. With the crushing defeat at space, the Confederation would have to stop its offensives within 2 to 3 weeks and start consolidating before another major push could be launched. So with a bit of tweaking, Palpatine could ensure that he would get the long war he needed. Ironically, he could use Vale until both sides were truly stalemated. Until such a time, which was still months away, Sidious should have decided if he would want that man as his new apprentice, or if the good general would meet an unfortunate accident somewhere. The Sith Lord grinned. 2 weeks, then he would have some free entertainment to look up to. The trial of Windu was fast approaching. He just hoped that the Jedi would mess it up and do his job in destroying most of their reputation themselves. Meanwhile, he would be busy. After those idiots killed most of the Senate, and not even the right part, criffed them all, he had to deal with a mountain of paperwork. On a more cheerful note, now it would be much easier to concentrate more power in his hand as he planed from the beginning. RK, Council Chambers, Jedi Temple, Coruscant. Yoda was sitting in his chair, and to anyone who would look at him, it appeared that he was meditating. However, that was not the case. He was pondering the future. Both of the Republic and the Jedi Order. The present was changing in ways he could have never foreseen. Now he had to deal with the fallout of his own mistakes. With Vale coming from the past, Yoda was now almost certain that he had shaped the Order in a wrong way. He had prepared his people to fight the wrong kind of war. Against the influence of a Sith as Vale, they were in a bad position. The only ray of hope, where that man was concerned, was the fact that he apparently didn't hate the Jedi or desire their destruction as an ordinary Sith would. "Enough it is not," muttered the ancient being. Vale's very existence was a threat to the Order's stability like no other. Arguably, Del-Katar was as dangerous to the Jedi as the Sith who started the war, just in a different way. Yoda could almost appreciate the irony of this situation. Faced with a Sith who didn't want their destruction, the Jedi were about to shatter the Order themselves. There were many of his people who were blinded by the Jedi creed. They were seeing in absolutes, almost as a Sith would. Granted, he had been trying to slowly push for reforms, targeted at making the Jedi more open-minded, yet the truth was that he was far from successful, or at least not as successful as he should be. Changing the Order was a very slow process which was met with a lot of opposition. Despite what many outsiders might think, he was no dictator. As the Grand Master of the Jedi Order, Yoda was first amongst equals. It had taken him decades to build a somewhat progressive council, so that on a good day he could push for some small changes. Now that looked scarcely enough. There was a rift forming amongst the Jedi, and soon it would all come to a head. Windu's trial was approaching, and Yoda had no idea how that would go. He had spoken with all the Jedi Masters and knew that they were evenly split right now. When Windu and Vale speak in front of the Council, everything will be decided. Yoda knew that for a lot of Jedi, it won't be about the evidence, or whether Windu had broken the Republic's laws. In fact, in the eyes of many of his people, Vale and the Jedi supporting him will be the ones being judged. From the cradle, the Jedi had been taught that the Sith were the one true enemy, and now one of them was left to do whatever he wanted, or at least so it seemed. Yoda shrunk in his chair. He felt trapped in a net of his own making. 33. Interlude 4. Interlude 4, =RK=. Briefing room, assault ship, leveler, high orbit over Coruscant. I entered the room and sealed it behind me. I looked around at a sea of the same faces looking straight. There was a whole company of clones standing at attention, waiting me to act. I give them a sharp nod. They'll do. I went to the small dais at the left side of the room and spoke, "Stand at ease, men." I met the eyes of the newly promoted Captain Trek. He returned my look, and I could clearly see his unflinching determination. I used the Force to sweep the room for any active or passive listening devices just in case. I found none, but just in case I surrounded us in a dampening field, which would ensure our privacy. You've all volunteered for a special assignment. As of this moment, you are officially part of 91st Reserve Company. As far as anyone outside this room is concerned, your unit's only purpose is to provide replacements for casualties suffered by the forces under my command. Do you understand? Yes, sir, they spoke as one. You will undertake a special training regiment, which amongst other things will prepare you to face Force adepts and not only survive such an encounter, but win, I stated. During the last war I was part of, we, the Sith, trained ordinary people to become competent Jedi hunters amongst other things. These men in front of me were going to become a nucleus for such a force. While right now I didn't plan to fight the Jedi, I wanted to have troops able to go against them and win without overwhelming numeral superiority. Just in case. Besides, having my own Black Ops outfit could be useful for a lot of things. These men were special. I had not only removed the programming placed upon them by Sidious cronies on Kamino, but had used the Force to subtly probe their minds. That's how I had chosen who to recruit. I could be sure that these men would be molded into weapons who would obey only me when their training was complete. And that was without screwing with their minds with the Force. The downside of this method was that there was a tiny pool of future recruits, unless I wanted to mess with their heads to such an extent that they would be little more than slaves. In few months, I would have the first Black Operations unit under my exclusive control. =RK, lower levels Coruscant. Officially, I was inspecting some of the equipment that my forces were expected to use as a break from the monotone work needed to turn my army and fleet from a fiction written on a datapad into reality, which was slow-going, boring work as I knew it would be. In reality, I had discarded my recognizable armor for a dark hooded robe and was going to a meeting into Coruscant's not-so-pleasant underbelly. After dealing with the pirates who had captured Dooku, I finally had some credits to burn, and I could start to build my power base outside the GAR. I was well aware that in the future I would need to do some distasteful things outside the official channels. I reached a small, nondescript cantina. There were thousands just like it strewn all over Coruscant. I nodded at the bouncer, a bored-looking Trandoshan who was standing under a non-functional hollow panel, which usually was used for advertisements. "I'm here to see Vonks. Lorek sent me," I told him. He studied me for a moment, sniffed in my direction before nodding. "Back room. Don't make any trouble, or I'll use your spine to clean up my teeth." He grunted and grinned at me. He had a lot of teeth, big ones too. I could easily believe that he can use someone's spine to clean them. It wasn't my problem. I just shrugged and entered the cantina. Inside, I was greeted by a semi-dark expanse. The deep shadows did a great job of hiding everyone's faces. I briefly scanned the room and walked in once I felt that I wasn't in any more danger than the average visitor of this fine establishment. Then I immediately regretted not bringing my helmet. The damn place stank worse than a week-old battlefield where no one bothered to retrieve the corpses. Perhaps it was because I was human. There was only one of my species inside, and all others were aliens, a few of whom from species I wasn't familiar with. I ignored the looks that the patrons gave me and headed straight to the back room. There I had the same conversation with a pair of guards that I had with the bouncer. They scanned me for weapons, but I countered that by projecting a dampening field over my lightsaber. Not surprisingly, it worked. That was a useful trick I had picked up from a Sith assassin during my training on Korriban. Thankfully, the back room had working ventilation, and there the stench was mostly gone. I found myself across a plain desk, behind which was sitting a Rodian. His huge eyes were fixed on a datapad. In the four corners of the room were standing guards, a quartet of huge Trandosians armed with blaster carbines. "Sergeant Lorek sent you, or so you claim," whispered the Rodian. "I'm his new business partner." I answered nonchalantly, "I need to procure a few ships and a lot of equipment. You came highly recommended." Who would have thought that a crooked supply sergeant could be such a spring of useful information? It was too bad that when I had finished with him, his brain was ready to start leaking from his ears. "Is that so? Then where is that shifty human?" "Dead," I deadpanned. The guards stiffened. I could feel that they were ready to pounce on me, figuratively speaking. "Is that so? It's such a loss," he said in a tone which made obviously that in his opinion it was anything but. "Now you just have to prove that you aren't some kind of law enforcement and we can talk business." I smirked and take hold of the force. It swirled around me and I used it to grasp the necks of the four guard. A mental nudge in the correct directions and four almost simultaneous snaps could be heard. The dead mercenaries grumbled to the dirty floor. I looked at the shocked Rodian. I guessed that my little demonstration wasn't something that you see often, or at all in this age. He tried to press a panic button under his desk and no doubt summon more guards, but I had his hands in a secure telekinetic grip. "Vonks, I believe that this is a sufficient demonstration," I asked, nodding to one of the cooling corpses. He stared at me for a long moment before frantically nodding. "Ah, yes. Obviously you are not with the security forces," he stammered. "Now I believe that you'll uphold your reputation and get me what I need," I asked cheerfully. Sith Negotiations 101. I was glad to see that it still worked. "Yes, sure," he exclaimed. "That's great, Vonks. Now here is what I need. A bulk freighter, which has docks for smaller ships, at least 3 smaller transport ships, which can dock with said freighter, minimum 6 assault shuttles, 200 sets of medium armor, same number of blaster rifles and pistols." By the time I had finished listing what I wanted to purchase, Vonks's eyes were wide for very different reason. I could feel the greed positively oozing from every pore of his green body. Nasty image, that. "You can pay, right? That will be 300. Minimum." "Vonks," I muttered, making sure that he could feel the disappointment in my voice. He gulped and shuddered in fear. His greed had become secondary for the moment. "I wanted to say that it will be no more than 300,000 in total," he stammered. This time he was telling me the truth. "Splendid." We spent the next hour straightening up the details of our deal. RK Republic Cruiser Requiem, high orbit over Coruscant. I was meeting with Trek in a secluded part of one of the Venator's hangars. That by itself was a normal sight. By now everyone knew that I made sure that I knew the men under my command. The coming ops on Naboo represents an opportunity for us, I said. Yes, sir. How many of us can be taken off the books? At least a squad. It won't be hard to list that many as casualties, perhaps more if everything goes to hell. I want your men to scout the locations of the primary list. If they find one of them uninhabited, inform me and start preparing the facilities there. What about civilian personnel? Asked the captain. It's unlikely that we'll be able to retrieve Force-sensitive kids under the noses of the Jedi anytime soon. However, if the opportunity arises, we may have to retrieve such children and their families so they are not indoctrinated. Start screening appropriate candidates for a small new colony. We'll go from there. Yes, sir. 34, Chapter 15, Part 1. Phase 15, Intrigues. RK Part 1. Council Chambers, Jedi Temple, Coruscant. Skywalker was looking through the windows at the evening traffic flying near the temple. He had finished giving his report about the holding action he and Kenobi's forces had executed on Felucia. While that world was lost for the time being, the Separatists had committed their last operational reserves in order to take the planet. At least for the time being, everyone expected that there would be a lull in the fighting, so far as attacks on new space systems were concerned. Both sides were constantly sending reinforcements and supplies to the various active theaters, but after the Battle of Ryloth, the Republic and CIS were exhausted. 2 months. That's how long it would take for both our new warship construction and the Separatists to be completed, and for the next production batch to begin. Until then, neither side could attack without committing their strategic reserves. Shakti, who had returned to Coruscant hours ago, summarized the strategic situation. This will buy us some breathing space. Thanks to Corellia, we may be in position to go on a limited counter-offensive before the CIS are ready, said the hologram of General Valentra. We are drawing various plans for such action, added General Vale's holo image. In the meantime, we can finish with this distasteful affair, muttered Shakti. Everyone present knew what she was talking about. Windu's trial was less than a week away. Anakin shook his head. He could scarcely believe what the Varpad Master had tried to do. If it wasn't for the video of the event, he would be in denial. Skywalker took a deep breath and winced. The rasping sound of the respirator mask was grating on his nerves. And he was supposed to wear the damn thing for 8 more days. Away from the battlefield, sometime you two should take, said Yoda. The old Jedi Master looked at the 2 youngsters in the center of the room. As archive security, you can be, young Padawan, he continued, nodding at Ahsoka, who didn't look thrilled by the announcement, but kept her tongue in check. But giving cheek to the Grand Master of the Order wasn't a good idea, especially for a Padawan. Skywalker, rest you should, added Yoda. Anakin didn't protest either. If he was lucky, he could rest with Padme. That is, if she didn't kill him first. Skywalker had understated a bit the injuries he had received on Ryloth and dreaded meeting her face-to-face for the first time since then. RK undisclosed location Coruscant. Bane was cooling his heels in one of his safe houses on Coruscant ever since the debacle at the Senate. Since that incident, he was on the Republic's most wanted list. It was only his skills and a bit of luck that allowed him to get away. The comm terminal in his room came to life. A holographic image of a human male hidden under a dark cloak appeared over the only desk in the room. Excuse the interruption, bounty hunter. I have need of your services. Bane stiffened. This was the man who had almost gotten him killed. He turned from the window and sneered at the cloaked figure. Now, listen you. A new, foolproof identity, stated the human. Bane's mouth snapped shut. That was what he needed in order to continue operating with relative impunity. However, at the moment, he had no access to his usual contacts. They were not crazy enough to bring on themselves the heat that will come with him. And that will be just a free bonus for your services so far. What do you need? I need a Jedi holocron, stated the old man. Bane stared at the Sith Lord. Was that human insane? In order to get a Jedi holocron, I need to break in the damned Jedi Temple. You know the place, I presume? The same temple that was attacked few short weeks ago. The place will still be on high alert, and it will be crawling with clone troopers. He deadpanned, unable to keep the disbelief out of his voice. He was a mercenary, not a crazy fanatic with suicidal tendencies. It's a criffing suicide. I will provide you with the means to get inside and out, as well as a way off world. I have some expendable agents that will be useful for the occasion. What do you want to do the job? Bane stared at the image of the Sith Lord. He could accept, or rot in this criffing room. When all was said and done, it wasn't a hard decision. He was going insane in this glorified cell. I want triple my usual rate, as well as a =RK =, General Vale's office, Republic High Command, Coruscant. I finally finished my AAR for the whole mess on Ryloth. Even with the help of my staff, it took about a week to get it all done. Finally, that damned thing was finished. I drained the remaining caf from my mug and checked the time. It was around 9:20 in the evening. I smiled. For once I would be able to get out at a reasonably early hour. That hasn't happened since the whole Blue Shadow fiasco. I sent the electronic copy of my report to Valentra, saved 2 copies on different machines for myself, and placed the pad on which I was working at a pile of similar devices in the out basket on my desk. Then I activated the security, and a golden force field appeared over the stack of electronic devices. An overworked lieutenant would gather them in the morning and upload the information in the secure archives in the building's basement. I checked what was left of my paperwork and smiled. It wasn't something that my minions couldn't do in the morning. Besides, I had let the lucky bastards to retire early tonight. I grabbed my black cloak and headed out, when the door on my office chimed. I opened it a moment later and saw Shakti in all her vibrant glory. She smiled at me, too cheerfully. Uh-oh, I've been married, you know. I knew exactly what that type of smile on a woman's face meant. I was in deep trouble. Hi, Del Qatar, she said sweetly. Yep, very deep trouble. Where is an enemy surprise attack or something? When you need it. Hi. I smiled at her. I think it was a normal and not a nervous smile. =RK, =, 500 Republica, Coruscant. I know, the death toll on Ryloth rivals the total Blue Shadow casualties, and that doesn't even take into account the millions taken by the Hutts, said Amidala. She was sitting on the couch in her living room with a holocom placed on the table in front of her. The transparent images of Bail Organa and Mon Mothma were floating over it. The sheer devastation caused by the droid army on Ryloth means that world would be unable to sustain itself for the foreseeable future. Added Mothma. Padme frowned. We'll be sending what little humanitarian aid we can, but after the last crisis caused by the war, there is not much that Alderaan could provide at the moment, said Bail. He looked tiredly at Amidala. It wasn't like her homeworld of Naboo could help anyone but itself right now. The consequences of the Blue Shadow on the planet's economy were catastrophic. Padme had rarely felt so helpless as she did ever since Naboo was attacked. The following events made it even worse, if that was even possible. For weeks, a cancerous thought had been running through her mind. What would have happened if she hadn't tried to stop the creation of the Republic Army? Would everyone have been better prepared for the terrors of this war? What about Naboo? Even if anything she had done couldn't have prevented the bio-attack on Theed, that still left Ryloth and the nightmare that the damned slavers had unleashed on that world's inhabitants. Padme sighed and looked at her friends. We should try to persuade what's left of the Senate to send more aid to Ryloth, she said in a tired voice. Yes, that will be for the best, if we can persuade them, muttered Bail. The front door of Amidala's apartment chimed. So that's what we'll do. Let's meet tomorrow morning in the Senate and we'll start, she said, and stood up, heading towards the door after a brief goodbye. She opened it and looked at Anakin. At first she was overjoyed, giving him a breathtaking smile. Then Padme saw the way he was behaving. Her husband was a bit stiff, and thanks to her vast political experience, she could easily see that the smile he had under his mask was forced one. He was hiding something. She grabbed his shirt and dragged him inside. Anakin Skywalker, snapped Padme in a tone that brooked no argument. A delicate finger pocked his tender ribs, making him wince. "Explain, now, poke, poke." He grunted. "Only a scratch, is it?" She grumbled. "Wait, Angel, I can explain." He stammered. "This better be good, mister." RK equals sign. I got lucky. For the moment, at least. Shakti was temporarily mollified by a dinner in a nearby restaurant. At the moment, a lot of her attention was dedicated on devouring of a juicy steak from a mammal native to Chile. Even better, I still have all vital body parts attached. I had learned the hard way that one of the best way to calm down and make up to a pissed-off Togruta female, that is, beside the obvious groveling, and a lot of it, sincere too if said woman is a Jedi, was getting to the nearest restaurant, preferably one that provided meals native to Chile. I think it was a legacy of the way her species evolved from predators that you could calm down an irritated Togruta female by feeding her a rare steak or something similar. It definitely won't solve the problem, but it would buy you time to explain yourself. That last part was vital. When the female you've pissed off was a lightsaber-wielding woman who knew how to use it. Shakti swallowed a bite of her steak and pointed her fork at me. I still haven't heard a good explanation. Well, that was my problem. I didn't have one that was likely to satisfy her. Just logical ones, from the POV of a Sith, that is. All of which would piss her off even more. I took a sip from my Corellian ale and prepared to bite the bullet. Part of the truth would be best, I think. "You and Ahsoka are Jedi." I stated the obvious. She gave me a deadpan look and silently beckoned me to continue. "I assumed that you knew how to neutralize any tranquilizer or poison that the pirates had placed into the drinks. Obviously, I was wrong. Granted, if I didn't know better, that would have been a prudent assumption." "Uh-huh, I'm still listening. You not only used us as bait, but made sure we didn't know your plan for dealing with the pirates. You lied to us." Her dark eyes bored into mine with intensity that I found fascinating. "No, I didn't," I confirmed with a small smile. "There is a fundamental difference in the way you Jedi operate and the way I handle things. I don't fear that my actions would turn me to the dark side. It gives me much larger pool of tactical options. What the Jedi in general find unpalatable or unthinkable, well, it's just another day in the office for me." "You weren't going to accept Onaka's deal anyway, were you?" she asked. "No. While there was a tiny chance that he wouldn't try to backstab us, it wasn't something that I was going to count on." I took a bite of my own steak. It tasted terrific. "That isn't the way a Jedi could afford to look at the world." She nodded after thinking for a few moments. "If we had such a mindset, we would be perilously close to falling. And if we pulled the stunts you have so far or suggested," she muttered. I think she meant my requesting a permission to purge big parts of Naboo if necessary to stop the spread of the virus. "Do you think that I've fallen to the dark side?" I asked her calmly. Her eyes widened a bit and she stared at me. I could sense her probing me with the Force. For a moment I let the camouflage over my alignment slip, so she could sense me as I was. Here mouth opened making an O, and she stared at me. "That's not exactly what you expected, is it, Shakti?" I asked her quietly. RK equals sign, undisclosed location Coruscant. 3 men and 2 women were meeting in an old apartment building. They gathered around a holo projector over which could be seen the plans of the Jedi Temple. "You all know the plan," said their leader. A chorus of yes sounded in the small room they were using as a headquarters. "Let's recap it anyway. Tomorrow is our big day, and we can't afford any mistakes. That building will be swarming with Jedi and clones. We won't have a second shot at retrieving the object." By that he meant that even if successful, the odds of any of them making it out of the temple were minimal. Besides, after tomorrow, the security there would be about as possible. The Jedi wouldn't allow a third breach. After their play, the next one who wanted to waltz in the temple would need a whole damn army to do it. "Let's begin. We'll infiltrate in the morning with RK equals sign 500 Republica, Coruscant." Anakin twisted on the couch, trying to find a more comfortable position. His tender chest didn't help in that venture. In the end, he had been able to calm Padme down after coming clean about what had happened on Ryloth. He had told her everything. from the beginning of the space battle to the disastrous assault on the village, about the way he had criffed up and got most of his men killed, of how Vale was forced to call in an orbital strike on his position. In the end, Skywalker told his wife about his own injuries, which along with Del-Katar's stunts were the two things that pissed her off the most. He was sure that Padme would have words with Vale, which the general won't enjoy, but that was a cold comfort. She was still royally pissed off because he lied to her. As a consequence, he was sleeping on the couch, alone. Anakin grumbled and twisted on his so-called bed. The damn thing was uncomfortable as hell. 35, Chapter 15, Part 2. Phase 15, Intrigues. =RK=, Part 2, Galactic Delight Restaurant, Coruscant. It lasted only a precious few seconds. However, it was more than enough to mesmerize her. Shakti's wide eyes stared at the river of force energies calmly bubbling in front of her. She could see strands of light and dark fighting for supremacy all over Vale's aura. Yet the end result was something akin to a balance. This wasn't something she expected to see from a man who used mostly the dark side of the Force. Vale smirked, and she could feel him accessing the energy permeating his body. What followed left her speechless. First, she could sense how he grasped the Force itself as it was the hilt of a lightsaber. The tendrils of darkness around him became a storm of midnight black flames, consuming all that was light. The Jedi Master felt chilled to the core as she stared into an inferno made of freezing shadows. Then it abruptly halted. Shakti could almost experience the way Vale subjugated the dark side and made it leave him. His aura cleared, once again becoming a battlefield between the two mirror images of the Force itself. Nevertheless, that wasn't the end of the demonstration. Del-Katar gave her a soft, almost serene smile and closed his eyes. Suddenly, a surge of warm light engulfed his whole being, pushing back the darkness, which dissipated like moths made of twisting shadows. For a moment, Shakti could swear that another Jedi Master was sitting at the same table instead of a Sith. She bathed in the warm glow of the light side of the Force for the next few seconds, until it too drained from Del-Katar, leaving him as he was in the beginning. In the next moment, Shakti felt something snapping into place, and she was facing only a man powerful in the Force who no longer showed his alignment. She stared at Del-Katar with an open mouth which was disinclined to obey her commands. "That's not exactly what you expected, is it, Shakti?" His quiet question snapped her out of her stupor. She closed her mouth with an audible click and looked at Del-Katar with fascination. A small smile of pure joy tugged the corners of her lips. Her eyes sparkled with excitement. "Why do I have the feeling that I've been just served for dinner?" muttered Vale. Shakti couldn't help it and laughed. "Perhaps later," she whispered, showing him a toothy grin, which apparently was not reassuring judging by his reaction. Shakti took control of her emotions and pushed them down, becoming somber. "You are aware that Windu's trial has the potential to become a very big problem for both the Jedi and the Republic, right?" she asked, abruptly changing the subject. She had to, because various un-Jedi-like thoughts and instincts were stirring within her. Vale frowned, with his posture suddenly becoming deadly serious. "I am, at least in part. I have to admit that some actions of today's Jedi make no sense whatsoever." "Have we changed so much from the Jedi of old?" Shakti asked. She just couldn't help herself. "More than you can ever imagine," muttered Del-Katar. "You asked me what I think about Windu's stunt. He criffed up by the numbers and probably harmed the Jedi more than the Sith did in the past 1,000 years. If you don't clean up this mess in a satisfactory manner, you'll lose something you can't afford to lose," he said with conviction. Shakti frowned. She thought about the possible consequences of the trial. The Jedi Master knew that the Council was divided, almost evenly, and despite what their decision would be, many Jedi would make their own minds up about who was right and wrong in this matter. She spat a quiet curse in her native tongue, which made Del-Katar smirk. Ah, right. He had been married to a Togruta and apparently had spent a lot of time on Shili. "Our credibility." A soft whisper fell from her barely parted lips. Del-Katar nodded in response. =RK=. Next morning, Jedi Temple, Coruscant. Yoda was discussing the direction of the war with Obi-Wan and Anakin when he felt a disturbance in the Force. The ancient being closed his eyes and concentrated. His insight into the possible future was clouded by dancing shadows which acted almost as if alive. He could feel a possibility. Trouble was coming to the temple, but at least this time he had a warning. Whether that would be enough to stop whatever was approaching was another question. Intruders there will be in this temple, today, Yoda stated with conviction. That wouldn't be a smart thing to do. Must, Kenobi? A week after the attacks, the Chancellor had managed to persuade the Jedi that the temple needed additional protection. So now they had a garrison consisting of a whole clone battalion, with a company on shift at all times. That wasn't all either. The temple was being refurbished to be more easily defended, despite the misgivings of some Jedi. Armored doors, laser turrets, even AA emplacements in the 4 towers surrounding the main building. Yet those defenses were still under construction, with a lot of people coming and going. That was something that could allow an intruder to sneak in, despite the enhanced security protocols. What would they want? Asked Anakin. They won't be after our starfighters. Kenobi thought aloud. Perhaps yours. He smirked at his former Padawan, who loved to tinker with and upgrade his interceptor. That is certainly something that couldn't be found in another place, chuckled Anakin. What else? He asked. The two Jedi looked at each other. Information, stated Anakin. Jedi communication codes. After the attacks, the only other place those could be obtained is High Command, but Vale and Valentra made that place a death trap for any intruder, added Kenobi. He didn't comment on the fact that those two were the main figures behind the temple's ongoing security upgrade. That was a mixed bag. Some Jedi, especially amongst the younger ones, were supporting those measures, while a lot of the older and more experienced ones were against it or at least neutral. Those codes, as well as a lot of information about troop movements, can be found in the Eastern Tower. I'm going there right away, said Anakin before sprinting down the corridor. I'll check the perimeter defenses from the Central Security Station, shouted Kenobi. =RK=, Holterra Clinic, Coruscant. Later in the morning, after I passed through my office and found to my delight that there were currently no fires needing to be put out, I went to pick up Arya. She was in a clinic owned by a group of doctors working for me. They were working on a cure for her condition. Speaking of my students, I had left Jabo on the Requiem, where he was trying to learn meditation, when he wasn't helping the engineers fix the battle damage to the ship. The Venator was docked at one of the defense stations in high orbit over the capital, which could act as a small shipyard. It was more than enough to fix the cruiser, and I preferred to have it on hand. Once its destroyed weapons and armor were replaced, which would be soon, she would be combat-ready despite missing its 2 command pylons. No big loss there, though a fella in the R&D division found a use for them besides being convenient places to stuff additional sensors and comm equipment. I found her in a small garden, which was built on the top of the clinic. She was pouting while reading from a datapad. Hi, Arya. I hope that the docs here treated you well. They always poke me with various devices or want blood. She pouted and looked at me with her mismatched eyes. She was trying to master the puppy dog look, but wasn't there quite yet. Get me out of here, Master, please. I chuckled at her antics. I guess that today is your lucky day. Yay! She jumped up and started bouncing around like a little girl, which in a sense she was. Where are we going? Something fun? To the Jedi Temple. I believe that there is something useful for us to see. Then we are going on lunch. Yes, she exclaimed, no more hospital food. Let's go then. I turned around and headed for the door, with Arya bouncing after me. I could feel her excitement through our bond. I had to do something about her and Jabo. With the war, I didn't have the necessary time for even one, much less 2 apprentices. Hopefully, once she was cured and could accompany me on most missions, that could be fixed. Jabo, who had a lot more to learn about the Force, was another matter. I wasn't going to put him into combat anytime soon. Once Arya and me were out of the clinic, we boarded the shuttle I had commandeered as my personal transport for the day. Today, I was going to use some of my privileges as a Republic general and, incidentally, troll the Jedi. That, however, will be just unexpected side effect, I swear. I boarded the shuttle, with Arya walking next to me, and saluted the troopers of Crate Company, who were acting as my bodyguards for today. Ever since the attacks on the Senate and High Command, all Republic generals were entitled a protection detail. Needless to say, this morning was the first time I was going to take advantage of that. We were heading towards the Jedi Temple, where I had 3 objectives. First, the official one, to inspect the defenses being built by the GAR Corps of Engineers and one of Coruscant's premier security firms, which had some nice toys to offer. The second one was more interesting. I had remembered something about the Jedi of my time and checked the datanet if it was still the case. There was one particular holocron in the temple which was technically available to every Force-sensitive person in the galaxy. I believed that it might be useful to check it and show it to my apprentice. And third, if possible, I wanted to check the Jedi archives about the fate of a few friends from the Empire era. I wasn't hopeful about that part, but who knew? =RK Jedi Temple, Coruscant. The Jedi are in for a rude awakening, thought a woman disguised as representative of Keldon Security, the firm which was upgrading the temple's defenses. She had her Force signature suppressed by an amulet she wore, as was the case for her 5 compatriots. The other woman in their group was walking next to her, wearing a similar outfit, while the 3 men had arrived early. They, as well as another agent, were dressed as tech specialists who were upgrading the building's perimeter sensors. That would give them an opening to exploit. The women reached the main entrance of the temple, where they presented their ID cards to the clones manning a checkpoint. They were scanned with a portable scanner, which found nothing out of place. The same with the cases of sensitive equipment that were trailing behind them on a hover sled. =RK. At the same time, a woman who had the ability to shapeshift was making her way towards the archives. Her mission was to hack the security network from one of the terminals there. Unknown to her, that would be only possible thanks to the other 2 women who would be upgrading the temple's security network at the time, giving her an opening to exploit. Unfortunately for the covert agents, none of them had any chance to pass as a Jedi Master and simply waltz in the vault where the holocrons were held, even though they could use the Force. Retrieving the device was only the first step. After they got the holocron, the real prize must be captured, the data crystal that was used to read them. Even more irritating, then they would need a real Jedi to make the criffing thing work. Persuading him or her to help was going to be a major pain in the ass. After all, those things were usually set up to destroy themselves and the data if someone who didn't know precisely what he was doing tried to tamper with them. The shapeshifter entered the archives and had to suppress a wince. A young Togruta female, who was obviously bored out of her mind, headed her way. =RK. We landed in one of the Jedi Temple's hangars, and I waited for my men to disembark. They gave me the all-clear signal, and I marched down the ramp, followed by Arya. She was looking around nervously. I couldn't blame her. The last time she was here, my apprentice was attacking the damn place. We were met by a squad for 812th Infantry Battalion, who, after checking our IDs, waved us through. Good for them. If they just let us through on my behalf, there would have been hell to pay. It was time to start the inspection. 36, Chapter 15, Part 3. Phase 15, Intrigues. =RK, Part 3. Great Hall, Jedi Temple, Coruscant. I shouldn't be surprised, not at all. What was irritating me wasn't the dirty looks many Jedi were giving my apprentice or me. It was kind of expected. It wasn't a problem with the inspection either, which was a pleasant surprise. The GAR engineers working on the temple were a competent bunch. It was the damn alarm which started blaring that soured my mood. The building was being put on lockdown. The clones who were on guard duty scrambled to seal up the exits and cover the various civilians that were in the building for one reason or another. I turned to the lieutenant who was our guide and ordered, "Take us to the security control room at once." The clone gave me a crisp salute and headed to the far end of the Great Hall, and we followed suit. The damn Jedi just couldn't stay out of trouble. =RK. Bane finally reached his destination and started slicing through the vault defenses. Behind him, the irritating tin can provided by the Sith Lord's agents was doing the same. The mercenary was already starting to regret agreeing to this assignment. He was almost caught by a clone patrol before entering the ventilation shafts and then he was moments from being sliced into salad by a giant criffing fan. That didn't even take into an account the insane extraction plan, which apparently consisted of 5 idiots raising hell within the temple so he could get away with the prize. =RK=. My apprentice and me were admitted into the security center of the Jedi Temple after another round of scans and checks. I left the troops outside and entered, accompanied only by Arya. Inside, we found the clone commander, who was in charge of the troopers protecting the building, 4 of his men working on various consoles, and of course a group of Jedi. Those were Yoda, who had a deep frown on his face, Ayala Secura, who until recently was leading the GAR forces on Felucia. To my pleasant surprise, the 3rd Jedi in the room was Shakti, who gave me a curt nod. My only disappointment was that she was wearing heavy robes which hid her mouth-watering figure. "Deep in the temple, the intruders are," declared Yoda. I smirked at his words. "I hope you don't mean us, Master Yoda," I said, unable to keep the amusement from my voice. He glanced at me. The look he gave me was enough to summarize his feelings on that question. It practically screamed children these days. Yoda closed his eyes for a moment, and I could sense him drawing on her force, which swirled around him, caressing the small being like a gentle wind. "Possible it is. Inside help, they have," stated the Jedi Grandmaster. He went to a nearby console with a built-in comm unit and spoke with deceptive calmness in his voice. "Possible deception, I sense. Disguised as a Jedi, the intruder may be. Find Madame Jocasta, you must." "I take it that Ahsoka is in for some fun time," I muttered, "unless they found her another job to keep the little Spitfire busy." =RK=. Archives, Jedi Temple, Coruscant. "Bane, the 2 Jedi have turned around and making their way towards you," said the archivist. Ahsoka frowned. That was the old woman's voice, all right. However, the Padawan couldn't really believe that the sweet old lady was the one helping the intruders. She tried to feel that person through the Force and frowned. Whoever was masquerading as Madame Jocasta was someone Ahsoka had never met before. She drew her lightsaber and used the Force to pull the stranger as well as the chair she was sitting on towards her. The doppelganger shouted in surprise as she flew backwards and landed in a heap at Ahsoka's feet. The Padawan glared at the confused expression of the old woman, who in turn was staring at the green lightsaber blade pointing at her head. "Who are you? What did you do with the archivist?" growled Ahsoka. The shapeshifter sneered, "The same thing I'm going to do to you." Ahsoka felt a warning coming through the Force and jumped back. She barely evaded the needles, which were shot from the wrists of the archivist's double. The imposter wasted no time and jumped to her feet, grabbing the lightsaber hilt she had retrieved from the old woman. She had to deal with this girl fast and get away from the temple while she still had a chance. The mercenary charged at the Padawan, holding the saber in a comfortable 2-handed grip. She hoped that her skills with a vibroblade would be up to the task. For an instant, Ahsoka was surprised by the sheer ferocity of the onslaught. She hadn't expected that someone who wasn't a Force-sensitive to be more than marginally proficient with a lightsaber. The Togruta fell back, deflecting the blows raining on her with practiced ease. A powerful strike pushed her to a nearby table, and she twisted to her left, avoiding the next attack which sliced through the furniture. Ahsoka glared at the imposter and went on the offensive. In the next few seconds, the Padawan found out that despite somewhat skilled with a blade, her opponent didn't really know how to use a lightsaber. Tano locked their weapons together and used the Force to pick up a nearby chair, which she used to strike the imposter in the back. The doppelganger was smashed against a computer console and slumped to the ground. The intruder's shape blurred, revealing her true form, that of a green alien female. Ahsoka used the Force to slam her adversary to the ground, so she was on her back and her arms pointed away from the Jedi. "I want answers," hissed the Padawan. =RK=. Security Center, Jedi Temple, Coruscant. "Master Skywalker, I caught the imposter. She says that the target is the holocron vault." That makes no sense. I could hear Kenobi's exclamation over the comm. "The holocrons are protected. You need a genuine Jedi to retrieve the information." Or a Sith who knew what he was doing, but I didn't say that aloud. If they thought that the holocrons could really be accessed only by Jedi, well, That was a delusion I was glad to let them keep. You can reach the communications tower from the vicinity of the vault if you cut through a few walls, said one of the clones who was examining the temple schematics. The vault is a decoy. We are going to the communications tower. Anakin's distorted voice rumbled through the comms speaker. A moment later, we all could hear a subdued rumble. That was an explosion at the vault, informed us one of the clones. Is this a diversion? Wondered Master Secura. Perhaps. Cloaks the future, the dark side does, murmured Yoda. See the truth I cannot. Sirs, we just lost the sensor grid over the Comm Tower, shouted one of the clones. I'm detecting a jamming field there too, added another. Anakin and Obi-Wan, who were patched through to the security center, could hear that too. The vault is a diversion. We are heading towards the tower. Seal that section of the temple at once, ordered Shakti. No one leaves it without being cleared by a Jedi Master first. I heard a clicking sound from the right, where the panel covering the air vent fell into the room. A short droid looked at us. Hey guys. It waved at us. I could swear that this machine was acting nervous. The Force screamed a warning, loud enough to cause a headache. I acted without thinking and grabbed Arya's arm, pulling her behind me. In the same time, I was wrenching as much force power as I could into my grasp and desperately molded it into a shield in front of us. The Jedis were scrambling too. Shakti, who had the bulk of a massive holoprojector between her and the small droid, grabbed the surprised commander and dragged him to the ground. Yoda and Master Secura, who were next to the robot, sent telekinetic waves at it. I could see a shield flaring to life around it, absorbing most of the power which struck it. Nevertheless, the droid was pushed back. I could hear it impacting the wall of the air duct. Then it exploded, showering Yoda and Ayala with a stream of liquid fire. The geometry of the air shaft worked against the Jedi, channeling a significant part of the blast wave straight at them. My hastily erected shield was buffered by the dissipating blast wave, but it held easily. I could sense that the two of them were alive. Through the smoke, I could barely make out a shimmer where the two Jedi Masters stood. I waved my hand, sending a telekinetic wave of my own, which dispersed a lot of the smoke, revealing that Yoda had erected a shield to protect them. My estimations of the little fella's abilities were raised up even further. This is another diversion, I stated, meaning the attempt to bomb us. I could feel clones dying in the temple. =RK=, Holocron Vault, Jedi Temple, Coruscant. Bane could hear a pair of Jedi running by near his hiding place. He smiled when they passed him without taking any note. So that medallion he was carrying actually worked. How interesting. The possibilities. But this was not the time for scheming. He had work to do. The mercenary moved to the half-blown vault door and squeezed himself through the hole. Once inside, he looked around. 3 of the walls, as well as a vast column, which was taking most of the space in the room, were covered top to bottom with small niches, big enough for cubes little bigger than a grown man's fist. He walked to the column and retrieved 3 of the objects at random. Bane knew that his client needed only one, but he wanted to have few spares, just in case. Now it was time to see if the extraction plan would work. =RK, Communications Tower, Jedi. Temple, Coruscant. When Kenobi and Skywalker reached their destination, they found pandemonium waiting for them. There were 3 squads of clones cut to pieces with lightsabers, as well as the bodies of 2 Jedi Knights and their Padawans. The armored doors leading to the comm center were a twisted ruin. That caught Anakin's eye. Obi-Wan, those doors were blown from the inside, exclaimed the younger Jedi. So it appears, agreed Kenobi. They carefully entered the comm center. Their eyes were scanning all around for traps, and the Jedi searching for threats through the Force. Inside, they found only dead equipment and the bodies of the men and women who were supposed to operate it. What got their attention was the ragged hole in the ceiling. It was painfully obvious how the intruders had gained entrance to the comm center. This section of the temple is being sealed off. They won't get away with it, hissed Skywalker. Obi-Wan looked at the mangled bodies lying around. Most of them had died in the explosion, which had caved in the ceiling, but a few were finished with lightsaber strikes. I agree, whispered the Jedi Master. =RK=, Security Center, Jedi Temple, Coruscant. Commander, I want this whole building sealed off. No one leaves the temple. Is that understood? I ordered the clone officer. Yes, sir, he answered, and started snapping orders of his own. This is an internal Jedi matter, protested Master Secura, who had escaped the explosion intact. We can argue about it when the intruders are caught. She was cut off by Shakti. We have bigger problems, so I don't want any bickering about who is in charge. She glared both at her fellow Jedi Master and myself. There will be no problems from my side, Master Shakti, I answered formally. Stopped, the intruders must be, declared Yoda. Deception within deception, I sense. Careful, we must be. Sir, we just lost contact with one of the detachments escorting a group of civilian contractors. Informed one of the clones. =RK=. The two female infiltrators nodded at each other. They had acted a bit sooner than expected, but that was only because a golden opportunity had fallen in their hands. A pair of Jedi had ordered their Padawans to help the clones escorting their group of civilians. So a few minutes later, when they were reasonably sure that there were no Jedi in their immediate vicinity, the covert operatives pounced. They used the Force to surprise the wet-behind-the-ears Padawans, summoning their blades and slamming the unfortunate youngsters in the nearby wall. Then they ignited the weapons and pounced on the squad of clones escorting them. Before the Padawans could recover, the troopers were dead, and the assassins cut them down as well. The stunned civilians were next to fall. The pair of assassins then separated, running towards their assigned targets. 37, Chapter 16, Part 1. Phase 16, The Future of the Order. =RK=, Part 1, Jedi Temple, Coruscant. Sir, jammers are going up all around the temple. We just lost sensor coverage over most of the building, one of the clones reported calmly, showing no sign that the explosion had affected him in the least. I can't sense the intruders with the Force, stated Master Secura. There are a lot of techniques and trinkets that can aid someone evade the foresight of a Force adept, I shrugged. I wondered what had happened with my stash of Force-related artifacts in the last few millennia. They were probably plundered by now. As Master Secura observed, it's your temple, Master Yoda. What do you need done? I asked Yoda. The Republic Army is ready and willing to assist the Jedi in their hour of need. I didn't add aloud the obvious again. Track down the intruders we must, their true purpose we know not, grumbled Yoda. By his expression, I could gather that he wasn't relishing almost being blown up to kingdom come in his own temple. Then there was the fact that a smug, smirking Sith Lord was standing in front of him, offering to help them. Again. Yeah, that had to grate. I could hardly conceal my glee. Who could have thought that being evil could be so much fun? Yoda's ears twitched with exasperation. Secured the younglings, and the archives must be. The communications tower, handled by Kenobi and Skywalker, will be. I'm going to the archives. I don't think that any of you would tolerate me being anywhere near your younglings. They didn't disagree with my assessment of the situation. Escort the general you will, Master T, declared Yoda, disregarding the glares headed my way. Or perhaps not. I could almost feel a tingle of amusement in his aura. I turned to my apprentice. Arya, stay here and make sure that the security center remains more or less intact. Besides, I won't risk some over-eager Jedi mistaking you as one of the intruders. That's a complication neither of us want. This time the Jedi agreed with me. This way, Vale. Shakti darted towards the door without sparing me a second glance. I dashed after her. I reached the Jedi Master when she was next to the exit. I was just in time to have a front-row view of the armored door sliding to the side and a lot of heavily armed clones trying to rush in. Trying was the operative word. The door was barely opened when my security detail rushed through, almost colliding with Shakti. Only her deft reflexes allowed her to slide to the right, avoiding Waxer, who was leading one of the squads charged with keeping me in one piece. "Watch out," warned Waxer, and moved to his right, opening space for the rest of the men. If the damn building wasn't under attack, and the Jedi who was almost trampled wasn't Shakti, it would have been an amusing accident. "Sergeant Waxer, your squad is with me," I ordered. "The rest of you protect the security center." "Right away, sir," answered me the freshly promoted NCO. Waxer was one of the many clones who found themselves bumped up a rank after the AARs from the Ryloth debacle got completed. There were a lot of free slots that needed filling when the dust settled, and that was a victory for what it was worth. A decent one, even, considering that we were ordered to go straight into a trap. I could detect a tiny hint of disapproval in his voice. Ah, yeah. He wasn't relishing the thought that the general he was supposed to protect was about to get himself in another mess. It was a good thing that I had chosen my security detail with the idea that they would be acting as a backup instead, as a bunch of glorified bodyguards. =RK GER Detention Center Sigma. Classified location, Coruscant. ALAT transport, flanked by 2 gunships, descended through the busy Coruscanti traffic. Various air cars and bulk transports were flying all around them as the 3-craft formation made its way to their destination. They headed to a nondescript building, which, as far as anyone knew, contained a minor R&D lab working for the Republic. After the attacks on Coruscant, no one was surprised that the army was providing security for the site. However, it was anything but. The place was home of one of the GAR's most secret detention centers. From outside, it looked like just another building associated with the army. Nothing special. It was simply another one of the hundreds, if not thousands, ordinary JAR facilities on Coruscant. Sigma Station, Avatar 031, requests permission to land. Stand by for identification code. Roger, Avatar Flight. Send the identification code. Sending ident. Code received, and it's clear. Avatar Flight, you have permission to land. Head to Pad 2. Wilco, Sigma Station. 30 seconds later, the 3 LAATs landed on the designated platform. The only door leading deeper opened, revealing 2 squads of heavily armed clones. The troopers moved towards the transport calmly and professionally. They did a brief scan while taking a position around it. =RK, Communications Tower, Jedi Temple, Coruscant. A man wearing a work clothes sneaked through the top levels of one of the Jedi Temple's towers. His mission was complete, and he only needed to get away clean. It was both easier and more difficult than one might expect. The temple's sensor grid was either disabled, and the Jedi themselves couldn't sense him. Yet he was far from safe. There were clones converging on his position, and soon reinforcements would arrive at the building, sealing it. He was running out of time. He was running out of luck. Make that he was all out, he observed to himself as 5 clones turned the corner. They were carefully sweeping the corridor, their weapons at the ready. Had he been less professional, he would have cursed. Instead, he acted. Would have hesitated. Instead, he acted. Before the clones could react, he was already in motion. He blasted them off their feet with the Force and was in their midst before they could even cry out in surprise. He landed blade down, impaling their leader before pulling a second soldier to him. The clone's armor provided no resistance to his crimson energy blade and landed behind him, neatly divided in half. The other clones managed to orient themselves and opened fire. 2 of their number died to their own blaster bolts, while the third found himself thrown into the wall and impaled by a fiery saber. The last thing he saw was the nondescript face of his killer. As he pulled his weapon from his torso, his expression as dispassionate as any Jedi. The man, pretending to be a common worker, deactivated his weapon and ran. A minute later, he passed through an air vent and crawled to the exterior of the building. One of the LAAT gunships patrolling around the temple passed near him, and he jumped inside through an open side door. There, he donned a suit of clone armor, making him appear just as one more of the countless duplicates of Jango Fett. =RK, near the archives, Jedi Temple, Coruscant. We met a human woman dressed as an employee of the security company, helping upgrade the temple's defenses. What an honor, she chuckled after studying us for a few seconds. The fact that she was out and about to begin with was remarkable. In a situation like this, it was a warning sign, one and enough to detain her with lethal force. However, that was almost an afterthought. She got our undivided attention for a different reason. We couldn't sense her in the Force. She gave us a demure smile and charged, activating a blue lightsaber. I drew my own weapon and sent a telekinetic wave at her, which she cancelled with one of her own, with no apparent effort at all. Then she counterattacked, blasting us with a solid wall of force energy. I managed to remain on my feet by shoveling a wedge of telekinetic energy in front of me. Shakti did almost as well. I think that facing something who wasn't there in the force had surprised her a lot and kept her off balance. She stumbled few paces back, but remained upright. I had to break Shakti of that habit. Being surprised by someone or something blank in the force was a good way to get yourself killed. There were various artifacts and force disciplines which could create that effect. For me, it wasn't anything I hadn't faced as an apprentice on Korriban, and that's before you take the various Sith assassins into account. There was no more time for thinking. The woman, whose most distinctive feature was an utterly ordinary, forgettable face, was upon me. That in itself was ringing alarm bells in the depths of my mind, but I was too busy fighting to pay enough attention to whatever my subconscious was trying to tell me. She was an unpleasant surprise. This nobody turned out to be one of the most dangerous opponents I faced ever since coming to this time. She was fast, strong, unpredictable, and a damn fine blade master. Our blades clashed in a screech of released energies. Moment later, Shakti was at my side, yet we couldn't immediately overwhelm our adversary. She ducked and weaved around our blades, parrying and riposting. "Who are you?" I asked. Her smile grew wider. =RK=, Communication Tower, Jedi Temple, Coruscant. Anakin and Obi-Wan followed a trail of death. While they couldn't feel the intruders responsible for the massacre at the comm center, they could sense the death of a Jedi. The Force signature that winked out felt familiar, but neither of them could place a name to it. Despite what someone might expect, neither of them knew all 10,000 of their brothers and sisters. It wasn't too far away. They rushed that way, only to find a Jedi Knight and squad of clones, who were cut to pieces. They could hear shots and the distinctive sounds of blaster bolts being deflected by lightsaber coming from nearby. The two friends wasted no time and dashed that way. Less than a minute later, they reached an intersection. There they found another group of gutted clones. A human girl laid sprawled on the ground. Her unseeing eyes looked accusingly at Anakin. He frowned, noticing her Padawan braid. He knew her face, but the name escaped him. Helen? Helen? Something like that, and now she was dead, cut down within the temple where she should have been safe. There was a charred hole where her heart used to be, a testament of how much both the Jedi and the GAR had failed that day. Behind the death, the two Jedi could see one of their own facing a pair of men in workers' coveralls. Kenobi recognized the man facing the intruders. He was Colron Plox, one of the better healers in the temple. However, the medic had never been particularly good with the blade, preferring to dedicate his time to studying medicine. Anakin and Obi-Wan activated their lightsabers and charged at the enemies. It took them exactly 3 seconds to reach the intruders, more than enough time for the infiltrators to deal with Plox. One battered aside Colron's azure lightsaber, leaving the man open for a slash. A crimson blade cut through his chest, leaving him to fall back to the ground without uttering a sound. A moment before Obi-Wan and Anakin were upon them, the duo of assassins whirled around and faced them. Blue and crimson blades clashed in a deadly dance. =RK=, lower levels, Jedi Temple, Coruscant. While the Jedi and their clone lapdogs were loosing their heads trying to contain multiple threats, a single figure stalked through the corridors of the temple. She was cloaked thanks to a stealth field and a liberal use of her force powers. Deception within deception within deception. Rinse and repeat. That was her master's modus operandi. Everything that was happening on that day was a sleight of hand. Strictly speaking, they didn't need to steal a Jedi holocron, not from the temple anyway. Her true master had access to few of those toys. Only a Jedi who would know how to bypass the encryption on the crystal, containing the names and location of the Force-sensitive children across the galaxy, was really needed. However, that wasn't her concern. She had an objective to achieve, and in the great scheme of things, the games played by Sidious and the Jedi were irrelevant. Down she went, level after level. Each one was less traveled than the last. Soon enough, she was stalking through halls which haven't been visited in years, perhaps decades. The only ones which paid any attention to these places were few old cleaning and maintenance droids. The infiltrator continued to descend. She was closing to her objective. She could almost feel it. RK, Kellin's outer rim. Meanwhile, thousands of light years away, Bola Ropal was oblivious to the four figures stalking him. It wasn't surprising. When all was said and done, the Jedi and most other Force adepts through history were reliant to their extraordinary perception and senses. Too reliant to them. An experienced clone trooper or mercenary might have noticed the stalkers. Not that would have done them much good. The four hunters stalking their prey passed through the crowds on the busy streets of this relatively new colony world as a bunch of ghosts. No one looked twice at them. Nearly an hour later, Ropal reached his destination. It was a small home on the outskirts of the town. He was there to pick up a particularly powerful Twi'lek boy. The kid was going to make a great addition to the Order, the Jedi Master was sure of it. Bola was few hundred meters from the house when he was able to clearly feel the child's Force signature. It was notable because he was not even trying. The Rodian took few more steps towards the house and halted. He sensed something, though it wasn't through the Force. Perhaps it was some kind of instinct or his sense for self-preservation. Rapol could feel eyes upon his back, something that wasn't surprising. No matter where they went, the Jedi were often stared at by the populace. Yet there was something different this time. He turned around and frowned. Four figures disguised by black cloaks were walking towards him like predators ready to pounce on their prey. If he wasn't a Jedi with all that imply, his eyes would have popped out of their sockets. He could see them, but as far as the Force was concerned, they were non-existent. He felt eyes upon his back and turned around. Four figures disguised by black cloaks were stalking towards him. His huge eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He could see them, but as far as the Force was concerned, they were non-existent. The Jedi's right hand fell on the hilt of his lightsaber. The figures continued walking towards him. They drew lightsabers of their own, which snapped to life a moment later. RK, Guard Detention Center Sigma. Classified location, Coruscant. The three LA-80s that just landed shut down all their equipment as the welcoming committee was surrounding them. The clones in the transport carefully came out, wary of their prisoner. The lights in the hangar blinked once and cut off. The computer system of the detention center crashed under a dedicated cyber attack. At the same time, the men who got out to secure the new prisoner were mercilessly cut down by a hail of blaster fire. "Good, let's go," grunted the man who played the role of prisoner. He towered almost 2 heads above the clones who acted as his escorts. They ran towards the entrance of the detention center. 38, Chapter 16, Art 2. Phase 16, The Future of the Order. RK, Part 2. Lower levels, Jedi Temple, Coruscant. It didn't look like much, just a plain metal door, one among many in a long dusty corridor. She took a deep breath, tasting heavy, stale air. Her body tingled in anticipation. The woman wiped the dust and grime covering a panel on the wall next to the door and started typing a long sequence of numbers. It took her 30 seconds to enter the whole code. Then she paused, waited for 5 seconds, and did so again. To an impartial observer, her actions might have looked pointless. After all, the panel appeared to be out of power, dead like everything in the deep warrens under the Jedi Temple. After all, this part of the maze under the Jedi's home had been cut off from the power grid for a long, long time. However, her actions were rewarded by a mechanical clicking which came from the door. It slid in the walls, revealing a short corridor which was lit by a soft blue light. The infiltrator stepped in and waited for the door to close behind her. A moment later, she heard quiet buzzing and actually felt the beams of ancient scanners mapping up the depths of her body. A quiet ping later, and the machines concentrated their attention on her head. The buzzing grew louder. She felt a tingling sensation within her cranium where one of her implants came to life. A blinding lance of power slammed in her head. An ancient computer uplinked with her implants. It touched her mind, probing, watching, judging. For an endless moment, she felt like ice picks were stabbing her brain. She stumbled, almost falling. She knew if it found her lacking, her life was forfeit. If the security system had been set up by ordinary Jedi, she might have hopped for non-lethal protections in place. But she knew better. That place had been created by the Old Republic's Special Operations Command and the some Jedi who weren't afraid to get their hands dirty when it was needed. And that place's contents needed protection. The machines around her chimed in content, almost as if the AI was happy. After all those countless years, it finally had purpose. The presence of the Old Republic AI became a soft buzz in the back of her head. Her codes and implant signatures checked up, matching what was stored in 3,600 years old databanks. The door in front of her slowly opened with a quiet grinding noise. The infiltrator looked at the large room that was revealed to her and smiled. Her prize was at hand. =RK=, Communications Tower, Jedi Temple, Coruscant. This anger he felt, it brought comfort. Obi-Wan knew it was wrong. It shrouded his senses, numbing the pain of seeing one of his friends cut down in front of his eyes. Feeling Corlin die drove him even closer to the breaking point. Another friend lost due to this senseless war. For a first time since Qui-Gon's death, Kenobi lost his calm. Again, hate tried to worm its way within his heart, but this time it succeeded. If it wasn't for this second attack on the temple in little more than a month, Obi-Wan would have remained in control, the model Jedi Master. Instead, he was betrayed by his own feelings. Anger and hate surged through Obi-Wan's being, and he fell on his chosen target as a rabid Krathhound. The assassin was caught off guard by the ferocity of the onslaught. The infiltrator fell back in a desperate attempt to avoid the savage bite of Kenobi's azure blade. He took a defensive stance, parrying the furious attacks raining all over him. The surprise almost did him in. He was facing a Jedi Master. They weren't supposed to attack in a berserker rage. For Kenobi, that moment was a solitary slip in judgment, one that would have interesting consequences down the line. He had to draw on all of his experience, years of training and sheer willpower to pull himself out of that maddened state. The sudden outburst of fury tampered off, but the anger was still there. The events of the past weeks were of sufficient gravity that his outage was too great to silence. Instead, his burning rage was tempered into a frozen spear of determination by a force of will that only a Master Jedi could accomplish. Obi-Wan took a brief moment to focus himself. He lost some of the momentum his outburst had gained him, but that was a small price to pay in comparison, one that Kenobi would pay gladly. He regained some of his control, yet this time the anger he felt refused to be banished. All he could do was to clamp down on this emotion, prevent it from distracting him in the heat of combat. Nevertheless, the anger affected him. While Kenobi fought it on one level, on another, deep within his subconsciousness, the Jedi used it. It made him faster, stronger. It gave Obi-Wan a killer instinct he usually lacked, no matter who or what he faced. =RK=. Anakin glared at the man who faced him, his own anger burning in his belly like a furnace, but not yet to the point where it overcame his good sense. This is the Jedi Temple, not a kerfing Sith playground, he silently fumed. Skywalker bit off a snarl and went on the offensive. This madness had to end. He was angry that these bastards would date to attack his home, furious that they dared murder his brothers and sisters, and frustrated that he seemed completely unable to stop them. So he reached down into that pit of fury sitting in his belly and seized it, harnessed it, and shook as he felt the passion surge through his body. =RK=, near the archives, Jedi Temple, Coruscant. Something was terribly wrong. I could feel it in my bones. It went beyond the irritating woman we were facing, but she was the immediate threat. I knew that the warning within the Force wasn't something that should be disregarded, though we needed to deal with her before I could investigate what my instincts were telling me. But that was proving out to be somewhat troublesome. The obnoxious woman we were facing was a different type of threat. She wasn't skilled enough with a lightsaber to pose a significant threat to either one of us, much less both of us. The main problem was that whatever she used to cloak herself from the Force removed one of our main advantages. Sith and Jedi both, we depended a lot on anticipating our opponents through the Force. But even that wasn't enough to completely explain it. Doing so could be extremely useful at times, but it came at a steep cost. An artifact could hide your signature, the proper techniques could conceal it, but drawing on the Force in that state was like turning on a light while hidden in the shadows. The moment you used your powers, the veil would drop. While often forgotten in the face of our more obvious abilities, one of the things that truly separated Force adepts from the common throng was our ability to enhance ourselves. Even a Jedi youngling could boost their strength and reflexes to a point that could challenge even a seasoned warrior. Shakti was a Jedi master, one of the best the Order had. Her skill was admirable, even to someone from my era, and I was a criffing Sith Lord, with all the power and ability that such a title implied. This woman should have been limited to human physical norms, yet she was matching us blow for blow. What she was doing should have been physically impossible. To make everything more irritating for me, there was the nagging feeling that she was somehow familiar. While I could swear that I had never laid my eyes upon her, somehow I knew her. It was maddening. Vale, have you faced someone like her before? Shakti asked a moment after ducking under a lighting fast swipe and riposting only to meet air as the infiltrator jumped back, avoiding my attempt to remove her sword hand. It was a good question. I'm not sure, I muttered. I propelled myself forward, using the force. My blade crashed into the infiltrator's stolen saber a moment before I slammed into her. I was a head taller, twice her mass, and not to mention in heavy armor. The collision should have thrown her off her feet, sending her dazzled to the ground. The first did happen. She flew a couple of meters back before rolling at a low crouch. As she glared at me and her eyes shone with soft blue light. A smile came to my face as the situation finally made itself clear. I stretched my neck, letting the bones pop quietly for effect. Ah, it's been a while since I faced something like you. Pray tell, how much are you enhanced? I asked. $RK =. GAR Detention Center Sigma. Classified location, Coruscant. The masked mercenary leading the raid grunted in displeasure. There was almost no resistance while he led the troops under his command into storming one of the better defended facilities on Coruscant. Just as expected, most of the building were on lockdown, cutting off the defense forces stationed within the detention center from his path. When all was said and done, he had to face a short company of clone troopers. Piecemeal. If he'd had to take them head-on, he'd have never taken the job. But with the aid of Benefactor and the agents he had within the Republic, a suicidal assault had been transformed into a cakewalk. Enough that he felt a pang of disappointment. While he might be a merc, and this was easy money, he still wanted a bit more of a challenge. Criff it all? Damn Sith and their schemes. Still, he reflected as he blew the head off yet another clone, killing all of these cut-rate Mandalorian knockoffs was still quite cathartic. The conclusion of his primary objective was underwhelming. A bunch of shaped charges blew the doors leading to their target. They were followed by a spread smoke and fragmentation grenades, with a couple of thermal detonators for effect, which left the last defenders easy prey for few well-aimed bursts of fire. The last squad of clones trying to stop him never knew what hit them. A hacked door later, and he entered a small cell, dominated by delicate life support machinery surrounding a large cylinder filled with clear liquid. Inside he could see a few pathetic bits of meat and one glaring eye. Behold the great and mighty General Grievous in all his terrible glory. This was all waste of time if you asked him. Pack this cretin and let's go before the Republic drop a regiment or something on our heads, grumbled Dirge. Roger, sir, answered one of the soldiers aiding in the jailbreak. $RK Kellins, outer rim. Bola Ropal steeled himself in the face on the oncoming assault. This is a first, he muttered. Facing assailants who were apparently non-existent in the Force was a new experience for the Jedi Master. Under different circumstances, he might have found it fascinating. But not now. Not only his life was on the line, but that of the Force-sensitive kid he had come to recruit. I gather that just going on our separate ways isn't an option, Bola inquired calmly and fell in a Sarasu stance, waiting them to act. The cloaked men ignored his words and charged. The Rhodian met their onslaught without flinching. He parried a slash aimed at his head, sidestepped an over-enthusiastic lunge, and jumped over a swipe which tried to cut off his legs, only to receive a kick in the ribs for his trouble. Bola was caught mid-air by the strike, and it sent him crashing on the ground. He wasted no time and rolled away, barely avoiding one of his attackers who jumped at him and nearly impaled him with his blade. Rapal sent a force wave at his attackers before jumping to his feet. To his unpleasant surprise, it only staggered them for a brief moment, but at least it allowed him to regain a bit of the initiative in the fight. He ran away in an attempt to get some distance between himself and the strangers trying to kill him. From the brief encounter, it was painfully clear to him that facing them all together was a losing proposition. Bolla sprinted to the nearest house and jumped to its roof. A moment after he landed, the Jedi turned around, and his blade was singing through the air. He caught the fastest of his pursuers off guard and cut through the chest of the cloaked man, sending him back over the edge to crash on the ground, meters below them. The remaining assassins moved as one, jumping together after their prey. =RK=, lower levels, Jedi Temple, Coruscant. She smiled. The large room was full with tables and shelves, each one of which was covered by artifacts from the Great War. Any one of them alone would be a great prize, yet she didn't spare them a second glance. Those trinkets, no matter how dangerous and useful, paled in comparison to her goal. At the far wall of the room, behind a solid wall of warship-grade armor, laid her targets. She went to a lit-up terminal, which was near the goal, and started typing. All the while, the AI protecting the small sanctuary under the Jedi Temple watched her with ill-disguised curiosity. It took her minutes of manually inputting codes which no living being should have remembered after all those years, before she heard a series of mechanical clicks. The room rumbled, and sections of the nearest wall slid down, revealing another room, much smaller this time. The infiltrator smile grew, and she walked into the computer core of the AI. She retrieved a datapad from her belt and hooked it to the ancient machine. Moments later, a chime rang in announcing that the new device was recognized and connected to the core. Copy all information to projects under case red and above, she ordered aloud while sending a mental command through her implants. The AI hesitated for a split second and obeyed. The woman had the necessary codes and had followed the procedures hardwired in its computer core. Meanwhile, the woman walked to the back of the room. Her next prize waited there, a pitch-black cube with 1-meter-long sides, a cylinder made by transparent metal in which a grey humanoid droid was suspended into a stasis field, a pedestal with a single silver holocron. That was it. She frowned. There was supposed to be something else there too. Computer, where is subject Ascension? She asked. It was removed 3,688 years ago, answered a bland, emotionless voice. To where? No data available. Damn it, she cursed, though 3 out of 4 should be good enough. The woman removed a starburst-shaped necklace from her neck and concentrated on the force. She reached with her right hand, and the holocron rose in the air. It started shifting under her directions until it revealed an emerald which was in its heart. The crystal flew to her outstretched hand, while the holocron returned to its previous shape and gently laid back to its resting place. The infiltrator pocketed her prize and went to the cube. She started pressing various points on it, apparently at random, while sending brief bursts of force energy through her fingers. Soon enough, it rang with a single note. A pulse of silver energy ran all over its surface, and it started shifting. Its outer edges became blurs, leaving an impression that the object now existed in more dimensions than a human could perceive. A quiet hum could be heard in the computer core. It was slowly becoming louder. It actually worked, she exclaimed. She could feel how the object was drawing in force energy to power itself. Moments later, she could feel a confirmation from the AI that the data transfer was complete. Erase all logs concerning my presence here and delete the data concerning projects under case red and above from your databanks, she ordered after retrieving her datapad. It was time to make herself scarce. Her job was done, and the device she activated should deal with any physical backups of the information that remained, or so she thought. She left without sparing a second glance to the room containing the AI's computer core. So it was no surprise that when the former cube started sending electrical discharges all around itself, it went unnoticed. One of those lightning bolts struck the pod containing the droid and disrupted the stasis field. 39, Chapter 16, Part 3. Phase 16, The Future of the Order. =RK=. Part 3, Kellin's Outer Rim. Master Ropal dashed over rooftops, moving away from his pursuers. His mind was racing. He had to draw them away from the kid. Bola didn't have enough time to ponder how they tracked him, though considering they were undetectable through the Force, that wasn't such big a surprise as it would have been otherwise. He had criffed up, relied too much on the Force for a warning that never came. He should have known better. Rapal landed on the street behind the house, with pursuers hot on his heels. He looked around, noticing a pair of box-shaped droids. The machines were cleaning the street, paying no attention to the commotion. If the Force didn't work particularly well when directly applied on the assassins, then he would have to improvise. To be fair, he was unpleasantly surprised when his Force push didn't throw them off their feet, but he had the nagging feeling that his plan was going to work. Bola turned around and used his free hand to more easily grab the droids with the Force. When the attackers jumped to the street, they were met by a pair of heavy metal boxes flying straight at them. One managed to use the Force to deflect the incoming projectile, which slammed at the side of the house behind the trio of cloaked pursuers. The man next to him wasn't so fortunate. He was unable to fully push away the droid, and it caught him on the right shoulder. The impact hurled the assassin back, who crashed on the ground in a moaning heap. The Jedi Master used the opportunity to counterattack. He not only temporarily incapacitated one of the remaining attackers, but had bought himself precious seconds before the one who deflected the droid could rejoin his unimpeded fellows. Ropal charged the masked man, who was able to reach him ahead of the rest. Their blades met in a fury of blows and counterblows. Bola smirked when the second assassin tried to join the duel. He used the Force to pick up one of the droid he had hurled like battering ramps and pulled it towards them. The machine flew low over the ground, demolished a section of the low fence surrounding the house it had impacted, and forced the second assailant to jump back. The man engaging Master Ropal flinched when the fence behind him was demolished. His guard wavered for a split second, and he got a lightsaber blade in the gut for his trouble. The assassin gasped in pain and tried to stab the Jedi, but Ropal grabbed the wrist of his sword arm before moving his weapon up and to the right. The azure blade cut through the man's chest as if it was made of butter, slashed his heart, and exited over his left shoulder. Bola left the dead man fall to the ground and jumped over the fresh corpse. He liked the new odds much better. =RK, lower levels Jedi, Temple Coruscant. A Jedi wearing hooded robe, which concealed his features, stalked through the deserted corridors of the temple. The lockdown of the building had actually helped him. No one expected that another one of the infiltrators would head for the basement, so both clones and Jedi alike were scrambling to seal all the exits and secure the perimeter. All the while they kept guard on what they believed to be critical areas. Well, the half-forgotten halls under the temple were none of that. Besides, there wasn't supposed to be a way to leave the building from there, as far as the current crop of Jedi knew anyway. Bane smirked and followed the directions displayed on his datapad. It took him about half-hour to reach his destination, a massive sealed door which led to a tunnel stretching for kilometers. He scanned the surrounding walls, found where the hardline for the sensors watching his exit was located, and got busy. 5 minutes later, that part of the security system was thrown for a loop, and he started hacking the door's control panel. It was a good thing that this part of the temple's underground was mostly forgotten, or he would have had to dealt with clone troopers and modern security systems. Cad Bane couldn't help but wonder how much the Jedi had forgotten about their own temple, though he was ready to bet a lot that after today's events, those lapses in security would no longer exist. The wall panel blinked green, and the armored door started opening with an ear-piercing grinding sound. The damn thing hadn't been in use for a very long time, which wasn't surprising. The sheet of thick dust in the corridor was a dead giveaway. Bane smirked and disappeared in the dark tunnel leading to safety. =RK, near the Archives Jedi Temple Coruscant. Enough to get the job done, the infiltrator answered and charged us again. I shook my head. All things considered, she was rather good. Good enough to slow down either one of us if she was lucky, though that was mostly due to whatever cloaked her. Against Shakti and me, once we adjusted to fighting an opponent such as that obnoxious woman. I met her charge head-on, forcing her to back off under a flurry of brutal strikes. That gave Shakti an opening, and she took it, slipping to the woman's left side. The infiltrator tried to turn so she could continue facing both of us, but I didn't give her the chance and pressed my attack. I saw a look of resignation in her eyes a moment before my Jedi Master friend made her move and literally disarmed our adversary. The crippled woman jumped back and leaned on the wall behind her. "Hey, just as expected from the two of you," she smirked, then scowled at us. "You've won nothing." Her head twitched, her eyes became bloodshot pools, crisscrossed by crimson veins, and she crumbled to the floor. I've seen more than enough corpses in my day. I knew she was dead before she hit the ground. I frowned at the body. This war was gaining a new and unexpected dimension. I wondered what secrets her body held. The GARR and D teams would love to get their hands on her implants. We still need to check on the archives. Shakti's voice got me back to the real world. I nodded and we sprinted forward. $RK =, near the Communications Tower Jedi Temple Coruscant. The raid on the Jedi Temple was all but over. The only remaining resistance were the two men who were engaging Skywalker and Kenobi. Those two infiltrators weren't faring too good. While they had superb training and top-of-the-line cybernetic enhancements, they were never meant to meet opponents such as those two Jedi, unless they had heavy reinforcements at hand. It was too bad that the ones who could count on help were Obi-Wan and his former apprentice. Not that they needed it. Both Jedi were quite furious, struggling to control their emotions. At least Kenobi was, yet he wasn't quite successful. While the Jedi Master was getting calmer, he was fighting with an aggression that would surprise those who knew him. His opponent was forced to fall back constantly in order to absorb the strong attacks raining all over him. The only reason that assassin was still alive was simple. Obi-Wan was a master of Sorisu. While he was quite proficient with some of the other forms of lightsaber combat, they felt off to him, especially when on the offensive. It didn't matter in the end. The infiltrator he was facing merely got an extra 15 seconds to live, but the outcome was a foregone conclusion. A sweeping strike pushed away the crimson blade of the infiltrator, who was too slow to parry the next attack. The tip of Obi-Wan's lightsaber slashed through half his neck before stabbing him in the chest for good measure. Behind them, Anakin was already done. Cybernetic implants or not, Skywalker's powerful strikes, enhanced by the force and the strength of his prosthetic arm, were more than the last of the assassins could handle. Punishing blow after punishing blow had struck the infiltrator's defenses until he could no longer keep up. There was no finesse in what Anakin did. He simply battered his opponent into submission, shattering his guard. That was it. The next strike cleaved the intruder in two. $RK =, lower levels Jedi. Temple Coruscant. Awareness came slowly. First to come online was the energy core, which started humming quietly before the sound dampeners built around it were fed enough energy. Automatic diagnostic programs ran next, on the heels of the power running through the droids' conduits. Surprisingly enough, the machine was in reasonably good shape. Next to come online was its data core, which immediately started running diagnostics. The hardware appeared to be all right, though it could use some newer parts. Then it was turned for the software to be scanned by expert systems before the droid could be really brought online. Its photoreceptors came to life, glowing blue. He remembered everything. HK 117 looked around, recognizing a much bigger AI core than his own. How interesting. But that was an afterthought. He was confined into a stasis tube, which apparently no longer worked. Getting out shouldn't be much of a problem. He still has a few of his built-in weapons installed. A blaster and a vibroblade in each arm, more than enough. What took almost all of his attention, though, was the construct spinning in the air to his right. How could he not, when the criffing thing was sending cascades of electricity all around it? More importantly, HK 117 recognized it. He had seen the effect of one of those things detonating. He and his master were safely in orbit at the time. The sentient war droid really didn't want to experience the detonation of this weapon firsthand. He wasted no more time, unfolded his vibroblades, and started carving his way out of the stasis pod. $RK =, near the archives Jedi. Temple Coruscant, meanwhile, all around the temple, the Jedi and Veil could feel something siphoning the force from underneath them. Only one of them knew what that meant. Shakti was rather disturbed when she felt something draining the force from around the temple. Then she saw Vale's face. It was pale, like a ghost. He closed his eyes, his face becoming tense. "I need to get to the tunnels under the temple, now," Del-Qatar snapped, surprising her even further. "Or we are all dead," he added more calmly. For a moment she was still, wondering what to do. It was easy in the end. For some reason she trusted him. Vale had more than ample opportunity to betray both the Republic and the Jedi, yet he didn't do it. Instead, he risked his life again and again to help them. "This way," she said, and ran down a side corridor, with Del-Qatar sprinting hot on her heels. "What is happening?" "We have a WMD charging under our feet," growled Vale. "RK, Kellen's outer rim." Master Ropal made a short work of his latest assailant. One-on-one, the assassins, despite their tricks, stood no chance against the Jedi Master. That only left the wounded one, who laid stunned on the ground with a shattered shoulder, which was great. That man had a few pointed questions to answer. Before Bolla could reach his prospective captive, he was nearly thrown off his feet by a massive explosion. A house to his right went up in a huge fireball, obliterating the dwelling. The Jedi stared at the smoking heap of rubble, which used to be the home of the kid he had come to retrieve. "You did better than I expected, Master Jedi." Another cloaked figure appeared. It appeared to be male, at least a head taller than the men Bolla was forced to dispatch. The stranger's features were hidden by an expensive-looking black cloak, but all that was secondary. Ropal could see what was in the newcomer's hands, a sleeping baby boy. So this was it, the reason for the attack. The Jedi glared at the man who dared endanger the future of the Order. The stranger chuckled. "Are you angry, Master Ropali?" He nodded at the kid in his arms. "You've gone to great lengths to secure the future of the Jedi." "He doesn't look like much, does he? Merely few months old, yet so strong. Though I would have thought that the Jedi would have sent his father to retrieve him. He is one of you after all?" Bolla's eyes almost fell off their sockets. How in the name of the Force? The ones who knew it could be counted on the fingers of one hand. "Galen Marek, I sense a bright future for this child," taunted the cloaked man. Ropal gripped the hilt of his lightsaber. He couldn't let that man kidnap the kid, yet engaging him would endanger the boy. The Jedi Master was concentrated on the obvious threat and his objective on this world. He never saw the faint ripple through the air behind him. The Force gave him no warning. Nevertheless, he sensed something and rolled to his left, his lightsaber sweeping behind his back. The Jedi's blade was stopped by something solid. Before he could jump to his feet, the tip of a force pike caught him under the chin, almost shattering his jaw. Rapal's world exploded with agonizing pain and purple light. He convulsed when another pike touched his chest, and his whole body seized in convulsions. "So predictable," the man holding Galen shook his head. Two men clad in black light body armor faded into view and stood at attention, their force pikes extended in parade rest. 3 pairs of eyes fell on the knocked-out Jedi. What Ropal had on his person was priceless. After all, the Jedi Master was carrying the key for his Order's very future. 40. Chapter 16. Part 4. Phase 16. The Future of the Order. RK=. Part 4. Near the Archives, Jedi Temple, Coruscant. This is General Vale, Code Black. I repeat, Code Black. Evacuate all critical personnel within 500 kilometers from the Jedi Temple. I repeat, Code Black. This is not a drill. Move it, people. I ordered in my comm after sending my clearance codes. It was going to be close. If we were lucky, that is. Explain, snapped Shakti. She was well aware what the code meant. An active WMD with the powers that be, me in this case, believing that it had a very good chance of going off. I could sense her worry and a hint of anger, which was trying to worm its way in through her defenses, only to be stamped out by her indomitable will. "You are sensing the Force being drained, right?" I asked. "It's hard to miss," she deadpanned. True enough, it was like a vacuum cleaner sucking the power surrounding us. "That is a Criffing Nexus bomb," I declared. She gave me a confused look. "Ah, so that unpleasant bit of history hadn't made it into any history books she had read. It would be fun to check what else they forgot, if I ever got the free time. It is a particularly nasty piece of work that is useful only on locations seeped with Force energies. It absorbs the Force into a multidimensional matrix, and when it has reached critical charge, or there is no more Force left to eat, it detonates. The Jedi Temple is one of the most Force-saturated locations in the galaxy, muttered Shakti. That's why I want everyone important within 500 kilometers radius evacuated. We would never get everyone out in time. Besides, if we aren't blown up to orbit, the panic a widespread evacuation would cause a lot of avoidable casualties. That earned me a withering glare from Shakti, who fired up her own comm and started speaking with Yoda. =RK=, lower levels. Jedi Temple Coruscant. The transparent alloy making up the stasis pod turned out to be much tougher than HK-117 expected. It took him 10 slashes before his vibroblades could rend it asunder enough for him to break his way out. Even then, it was an awkward affair. The droid managed to make a roughly circular hole in the middle of the cylinder and had to crawl out of it. It was a good thing that his master had designed him with a lot of agility in mind. Who knew that a feature meant to help him in sneaking around on recon and assassination missions would come in handy in such a way? Once he was out of that technological tomb, HK-117 turned his attention towards the Nexus bomb. The weapon was charging, but it was obviously defective. The arcs of electricity emanating from it were a dead giveaway. The droid scanned his databanks for all information he had about the weapon preparing to go off. If his sensors were correct about the power buildup, he wouldn't be able to get away fast enough, unless there was a fighter waiting fueled and ready in a nearby room. HK-117 had to disarm the bomb, somehow. However, there was a tiny problem with that plan. As far as he knew, once a Nexus bomb was active, only a Force adept should be able to prevent it from going bang. =RK=, lower levels. Jedi Temple Coruscant. Our dash to the temple's underbelly was a blur. We passed groups of Jedi and clones who were hastily, almost frantically making their ways to the docks, seeking a way out of the building, but we paid little attention to any of them. With every step towards the bomb, we could feel the Force being siphoned from around us, and as soon as we passed beyond the commonly inhabited parts of the Jedi's sanctuary, Shakti and me entered an empty void. At least that's how it felt. We dashed through parts of the buildings that have been abandoned by anyone but some old maintenance droids and the occasional curious Padawan. The ancient corridors pressed upon us, making us feel claustrophobic, despite being tall and wide. It was the lack of the Force around us that caused such sensations. And it was getting worse. I could feel my very life essence being slowly drained from my body. All I could do was to gather the Force deep within myself and try keeping it from being stolen by the charging warhead. Going in deeper and deeper into the abandoned tunnels under the Jedi Temple was becoming an agonizing journey. It felt like tiny pieces from my very being were being torn asunder with each passing heartbeat. I don't know how long it took us to reach the epicenter of the vortex draining the Force, or how we actually managed to go there while still possessing some of our power, yet we made it. Was it luck, the will of the Force, or simple stubbornness? I didn't care at the time. We found ourselves facing a short corridor with half-sealed blast doors at each end. I could see bolts of lightning lancing at random from the room within. Next to me, Shakti winced at the display. Going inside would be problematic. I gritted my teeth and raised a shield around us and sprinted through the cascading arches of electricity. Bolt after bolt struck me, harmlessly dancing over my defensive dome and discharging in the floor. Shakti was a step behind me, for some reason trusting me not to get us killed. We passed through a large storage room filled with once useful Sith and Jedi artifacts, which now lay dormant, drained from any shred of Force energies. I cursed quietly, which fortunately remained unheard by Shakti thanks to the sound of cracking electricity drowning my words. So much useful tools now fit only to be harmless museum exhibits. What a criffing waste. I shook my head and pressed on, reaching the far end of the room where the door leading to the Nexus bomb waited for us open wide. I stepped in and looked around. My eyes were busy scanning the much smaller compartment where the WMD was preparing to blow up. Bare walls, something that looked like a computer mainframe, the dazzling display of the charging multi-dimensional matrix, which looked like a bunch of shifting and twisting snowflakes made from silver energy, white and blue lighting bolts cascading in a deadly waterfall all around us. I would have called the spectacle beautiful beyond measure if it wasn't about to murder us. "Master, is that you?" exclaimed a painfully familiar synthetic voice. It was a ghost from a bygone era, which reminded me of better times. Hearing it almost shattered my concentration, and I was barely able to retain control of the shield protecting Shakti and me. I looked at the source of the voice and smiled, a silver of hope raising in my chest. The form of a familiar droid was standing next to the Nexus bomb. The torrents of lighting merely twisted around him, leaving him unharmed. "HK, what the hell are you doing here?" I blurred out. It should have been impossible. He was lost about a year before I was catapulted to the Clone Wars era. "Ah, Master, you are found?" exclaimed the droid. His head moved few centimeters to the right, and two sapphire photoreceptors locked on Shakti. "Togruta, Jedi, and she is definitely not your wife, though I could see some resemblance." "Is she hostile?" asked HK-117 while he took a defensive stance. A pair of vibroblades pointed at Shakti in what was supposed to be not too threatening manner. If the way her emotions shifted was anything to go by, she decided that HK's actions were fairly concerning. "She's friendly. I'll deal with the criffing bomb and we can catch up later." "Make sure that I'm not disturbed," I ordered and moved closer to the dimensional matrix. "As you command, Master. I'm glad you are back," exclaimed HK-117, and moved to cover my back, while looking at Shakti with what I supposed was curiosity. "Master, I have to ask a question in order to execute your orders more efficiently." "What is it?" I asked distractedly, while I was trying to remember how exactly I was supposed to stop the bomb from evaporating us. "What are your intentions towards the Jedi? Are you going to marry and impregnate her too? Should I consider her my new mistress and ensure that she is protected?" HK asked, with what passed for an innocent tone but was anything but. I could almost sense him laughing his metal arse off, the bastard. Behind me, Shakti spluttered. I suddenly felt like running far away, and it wasn't because of the bomb in front of me. "HK, shut up," I growled. "I'll deal with you later, bloody joker." I could feel Shakti's eyes boring holes in my back. Great, just great. If I didn't get blown up, I would get killed by pissed-off Jedi Master. "HK, right now I hate you so much," I muttered. "I aim to please, Master," exclaimed the droid. "However, I think you should concentrating on the ticking bomb for now, Master." The tin can was enjoying this. Nevertheless, he was right. The live WMD first, dealing with my rampant droid second. I closed my eyes and drew on what force powers I had left. My mind concentrated on the sensation of the energy being ripped from my body, and I followed the channel through which my very life was sucked away. Soon enough, I found myself in the epicenter of an energy storm. My senses were touching the dimensional vortex, a part of them even piecing it. I could feel the general form of the matrix, condensing the force into a ready-to-release destructive energy. I started examining it until I sensed what I could describe as otherness, wrongness, a line in the fabric of reality that didn't belong here. Jackpot. That was what I was looking for. It was one of the seams connecting the matrix with another dimension. I weaved my remaining force energies into a thin scalpel, wielded it carefully. I needed to work precisely, or my life was forfeit, in which case a significant part of Coruscant was criffed beyond belief. I cut through the very foundation of the dimensional matrix, manipulating parts of it and destroying others. More often than not, I had to leave the Force to guide my actions, as some of the parts I worked on were phased out in such a fashion that I couldn't perceive them clearly, or at all. It was a surreal experience, like I was on multiple places at the same time, yet not. It was hard, almost impossible to describe with words. Like I was split into multiple copies of myself, each of which had a piece of my mind and was directed by my will. I could feel what all of them experienced. Suddenly, it was all over. The matrix was altered. The drinking the Force slowed down and stopped. The last thing I could feel was the build-in energy being dissipated in other dimensions instead of blowing up a significant part of Coruscant. I grinned, a moment before the backslash hit me and I knew no more. Equal sign RK equal sign. Master, not again. HK spoke in exasperation. The general got himself knocked out. Again. Criffing organics. Ahem. The Togruta Shakti cleared her throat. HK 117 turned his head in her direction. So, are you my master's new girlfriend? He asked. Just to make a conversation until the general was conscious again. A bit of small talk, nothing to get angry about. Right. The Jedi actually growled at him. If he had lips, HK would have smiled, so his master was already getting under her skin. This was going to be so much fun.